Chapter 17. The ancient Goths of Germany, who, the learned Cluverius is positive, were first seated in the country between the Vistula and the Oder, and who afterwards incorporated the Herculi, the Bugians, and some other Vandalic clans to had all of them a wise custom of debating everything of importance to their state, twice, that is, once drunk and once sober. Drunk, that their counsels might not want vigor, and sober that they might not want discretion. Now my father, being entirely a water drinker, was a long time gravelled almost to death, in turning this as much to his advantage, as he did every other thing which the ancients did or said. And it was not till the 7th year of his marriage, after 1,000 fruitless experiments and devices, that he hit upon an expedient which answered the purpose. And that was when any difficult and momentous point was to be settled in the family, which required great sobriety, and great spirit too, in its determination, he fixed and set apart the first Sunday night in the month, and the Saturday night which immediately preceded it, to argue it over, in bed, with my mother. By which contrivance, if you consider, sir, with yourself, these my father, humorously enough, called his beds of justice, for from the 2 different counsels taken in these 2 different humors, a middle one was generally found out which touched the point of wisdom as well, as if he had got drunk and sober 100 times. It must not be made a secret of to the world, that this answers full as well in literary discussions, as either in military or conjugal. But it is not every author that can try the experiment as the Goths and Vandals did it, or, if he can, may it be always for his body's health. And to do it, as my father did it, I sure it would be always for his soul, s. My way is this. In all nice and ticklish discussions, of which, heaven knows, there are but too many in my book, where I find I cannot take a step without the danger of having either their worships or their reverences upon my back, I write 1/2 full, and t'other fasting, or write it all full and correct it fasting, or write it fasting and correct it full, for they all come to the same thing. So that with a less variation from my father's plan, than my father S from the Gothic, I feel myself upon a par with him in his first bed of justice, and no way inferior to him in his second. These different and almost irreconcilable effects flow uniformly from the wise and wonderful mechanism of nature, of which be hers the honor. All that we can do is to turn and work the machine to the improvement and better manufactory of the arts and sciences. Now, when I write full, I write as if I was never to write fasting again as long as I live. That is, I write free from the cares as well as the terrors of the world. I count not the number of my scars, nor does my fancy go forth into dark entries and by corners to antedate my stabs. In a word, my pen takes its course, and I write on as much from the fullness of my heart as my stomach. But when, and please your honors, I indite fasting, 'tis a different history. I pay the world all possible attention and respect, and have as great a share, whilst it lasts, of that understrapping virtue of discretion as the best of you. So that betwixt both, I write a careless kind of a civil, nonsensical, good-humored Shandian book, which will do all your hearts good. And all your heads too, provided you understand it. Chapter 18. We should begin, said my father, turning himself half round in bed, and shifting his pillow a little towards my mother. As he opened the debate, we should begin to think, Mrs. Shandy, of putting this boy into breeches. We should so, said my mother. We defer it, my dear, quoth my father shamefully. I think we do, Mr. Shandy, said my mother. Not but the child looks extremely well, said my father, in his vests and tunics. He does look very well in them, replied my mother. And for that reason it would be almost a sin, added my father, to take him out of them. It would so, said my mother. But indeed he is growing a very tall lad, rejoined my father. He is very tall for his age, indeed, said my mother. I cannot making 2 syllables of it. Imagine, quoth my father, who the deuce he takes after. I cannot conceive for my life, said my mother. Humph, said my father. The dialogue ceased for a moment. I am very short myself, continued my father gravely. You are very short, Mr. Shandy, said my mother. Humph, quoth my father to himself, a second time, in muttering which he plucked his pillow a little further from my mother's end. Turning about again, there was an end of the debate for 3 minutes and a half. When he gets these breeches made, cried my father in a higher tone, he'll look like a beast in 'em. He will be very awkward in them at first, replied my mother. And 'twill be lucky, if that's the worst on't, added my father. It will be very lucky, answered my mother. I suppose, replied my father, making some pause first, he'll be exactly like other people's children. Exactly, said my mother. Though I shall be sorry for that, added my father, and so the debate stopped again. They should be of leather, said my father, turning him about again. They will last him, said my mother, the longest. But he can have no linings to him, replied my father. He cannot, said my mother. 'Twere better to have them of fustian, quoth my father. Nothing can be better, quoth my mother. Except dimity, replied my father. 'Tis best of all, replied my mother. One must not give him his death, however, interrupted my father. By no means, said my mother, and so the dialogue stood still again. I am resolved, however, quoth my father, breaking silence the fourth time, he shall have no pockets in them. There is no occasion for any, said my mother. I mean in his coat and waistcoat, cried my father. I mean so too, replied my mother. Though if he gets a gig or top, poor souls, it is a crown and a scepter to them, they should have where to secure it. Order it as you please, Mr. Shandy, replied my mother. But don't you think it right? Added my father, pressing the point home to her. Perfectly, said my mother, if it pleases you, Mr. Shandy. There's for you, cried my father, losing temper pleases me, you never will distinguish, Mrs. Shandy, nor shall I ever teach you to do it, betwixt a point of pleasure and a point of convenience. This was on the Sunday night, and further this chapter saith not. Chapter 19. After my father had debated the affair of the breeches with my mother, he consulted Albertus Rubenius upon it, and Albertus Rubenius used my father 10 times worse in the consultation, if possible, than even my father had used my mother. For as Rubenius had wrote a quarto express, de re vestiaria veterum, it was Rubenius's business to have given my father some lights. On the contrary, my father might as well have thought of extracting the 7 cardinal virtues out of a long beard, as of extracting a single word out of Rubenius upon the subject. Upon every other article of ancient dress, Rubenius was very communicative to my father, gave him a full and satisfactory account of the toga or loose gown, the chlamys, the ephod, the tunica or jacket, the synthesis, the pinula, the lacema with its cuculus, the paludimentum, the praetexta, the sagum or soldier's jerkin, the trabea, of which, according to Suetonius, there were 3 kinds. But what are all these to the breeches? Said my father. Rubenius threw him down upon the counter all kinds of shoes, which had been in fashion with the Romans. There was the open shoe, the close shoe, the slip shoe, the wooden shoe, the soche, the buskin, and the military shoe with hobnails in it which Juvenal takes notice of. There were the clogs, the pattens, the pantofles, the brogues, the sandals with latchets to them. There was the felt shoe, the linen shoe, the laced shoe, the braided shoe, the calceus incisus, and the calceus rostratus. Rubenius showed my father how well they all fitted, in what manner they laced on, with what points, straps, thongs, latchets, ribands, jags, and ends. But I want to be informed about the breeches, said my father. Albertus Rubenius informed my father that the Romans manufactured stuffs of various fabrics, some plain, some striped, others diapered throughout the whole contexture of the wool. With silk and gold that linen did not begin to be in common use till towards the declension of the empire, when the Egyptians coming to settle amongst them, brought it into vogue. That persons of quality and fortune distinguished themselves by the fineness and whiteness of their clothes, which color, next to purple, which was appropriated to the great offices, they most affected, and wore on their birthdays and public rejoicings. That it appeared from the best historians of those times that they frequently sent their clothes to the fuller, to be cleaned and whitened. But that the inferior people, to avoid that expense, generally wore brown clothes, and of a something coarser texture, till towards the beginning of Augustus's reign, when the slave dressed like his master, and almost every distinction of habiliment was lost, but the latus clavis. And what was the latus clavis? Said my father. Rubenius told him that the point was still litigating amongst the learned, that Ignatius, Sigonius, Bossius Ticinensis, Baephius, Butius, Salmasius, Lipsius, Lazius, Isaac Casaubon, and Joseph Scaliger all differed from each other, and he from them, that some took it to be the button, some the coat itself, others only the color of it. that the great Baphius in his Wardrobe of the Ancients, chapter 12 honestly said, he knew not what it was, whether a tibula, a stud, a button, a loop, a buckle, or clasps and keepers. My father lost the horse, but not the saddle, they are hooks and eyes, said my father, and with hooks and eyes he ordered my breeches to be made. Chapter 20. We are now going to enter upon a new scene of events. Leave we then the breeches in the tailor's hands, with my father standing over him with his cane, reading him as he sat at work a lecture upon the latus clavis, and pointing to the precise part of the waistband where he was determined to have it sewed on. Leave we my mother, truest of all the pocacurantes of her sex, careless about it, as about everything else in the world which concerned her. That is, indifferent whether it was done this way or that, provided it was but done at all. Leave we Slap likewise to the full profits of all my dishonors. Leave we poor Lefevre to recover and get home from Marseille as he can. And last of all, because the hardest of all, let us leave, if possible, myself, but 'tis impossible, I must go along with you to the end of the work. Chapter 21. If the reader has not a clear conception of the rood and the half of ground which lay at the bottom of my Uncle Toby's kitchen garden, and which was the scene of so many of his delicious hours, the fault is not in me, but in his imagination. For I am sure I gave him so minute a description, I was almost ashamed of it. When fate was looking forwards one afternoon into the great transactions of future times, and recollected for what purposes this little plot, by a decree fast bound down in iron, had been destined, she gave a nod to nature. 'Twas enough nature threw half a spade full of her kindliest compost upon it, with just so much clay in it, as to retain the forms of angles and indentings, and so little of it too, as not to cling to the spade, and render works of so much glory, nasty and foul weather. My Uncle Toby came down, as the reader has been informed, with plans along with him, of almost every fortified town in Italy and Flanders. So let the Duke of Marlborough, or the Allies, have set down before what town they pleased, my Uncle Toby was prepared for them. His way, which was the simplest one in the world, was this: as soon as ever a town was invested, but sooner when the design was known, to take the plan of it, let it be what town it would, and enlarge it upon a scale to the exact size of his bowling green, upon the surface of which, by means of a large roll of packthread and a number of small pickets driven into the ground, at the several angles and redans, he transferred the lines from his paper. Then taking the profile of the place, with its works, to determine the depths and slopes of the ditches, the talus of the glacis, and the precise height of the several banquets, parapets, and sea. He set the corporal to work and sweetly went it on. The nature of the soil, the nature of the work itself, and above all, the good nature of my Uncle Toby sitting by from morning to night, and chatting kindly with the corporal upon past done deeds, left labor little else but the ceremony of the name. When the place was finished in this manner, and put into a proper posture of defense, it was invested, and my Uncle Toby and the corporal began to run their first parallel. I beg I may not be interrupted in my story, by being told, that the first parallel should be at least 300 toises distant from the main body of the place, and that I have not left a single inch for it. For my Uncle Toby took the liberty of encroaching upon his kitchen garden, for the sake of enlarging his works on the bowling green, and for that reason generally ran his first and second parallels betwixt 2 rows of his cabbages and his cauliflowers. The conveniences and inconveniences of which will be considered at large in the history of my Uncle Toby's and the corporal's campaigns, of which this I'm now writing is but a sketch, and will be finished, if I conjecture right, in 3 pages. But there is no guessing, the campaigns themselves will take up as many books. And therefore I apprehend it would be hanging too great a weight of one kind of matter in so flimsy a performance as this, to rhapsodize them, as I once intended, into the body of the work. Surely they had better be printed apart. We'll consider the affair, so take the following sketch of them in the meantime. Chapter 35. Whilst my father was writing his letter of instructions, my Uncle Toby and the corporal were busy in preparing everything for the attack. As the turning of the thin scarlet breeches was laid aside, at least for the present, there was nothing which should put it off beyond the next morning, so accordingly it was resolved upon, for 11 o'clock. Come, my dear, said my father to my mother, it will be, but like a brother and sister, if you and I take a walk down to my brother Toby's to countenance him in this attack of his. My Uncle Toby and the corporal had been accoutred both some time, when my father and mother entered, and the clock striking 11, were that moment in motion to sally forth. But the account of this is worth more than to be wove into the fag end of the 8th volume of such a work as this. My father had no time but to put the letter of instructions into my Uncle Toby's coat pocket and join with my mother in wishing his attack prosperous. I could like, said my mother, to look through the keyhole out of curiosity. Call it by its right name, my dear, quoth my father. And look through the keyhole as long as you will. The life and opinions of Tristram Shandy. Gentlemen, non enim excursus hic adjus, sed opus ipsum est. Plen lib via pist, 6. Si quid urbaniuscule lucime nobis, per muses et charitas et omnium paetarum numina, oroti, nimi male capius. A dedication. To a great man. Having, a priori, intended to dedicate the amours of my Uncle Toby to Mr. Asterisk, I see more reasons, a posteriori, for doing it to Lord Asterisk Asterisk. I should lament from my soul if this exposed me to the jealousy of their reverences, because a posteriori, in court Latin, signifies the kissing hands for preferment or anything else in order to get it. My opinion of Lord Asterisk Asterisk is neither better nor worse than it was of Mr. Asterisk Asterisk. Honors, like impressions upon coin, may give an ideal and local value to a bit of base metal, but gold and silver will pass all the world over without any other recommendation than their own weight. The same good, well, that made me think of offering up half an hour's amusement to Mr. Asterisk when out of place operates more forcibly at present, as half an hour's amusement will be more serviceable and refreshing after labor and sorrow than after a philosophical repast. Nothing is so perfectly amusement as a total change of ideas. No ideas are so totally different as those of ministers and innocent lovers. For which reason, when I come to talk of statesmen and patriots, and set such marks upon them as will prevent confusion and mistakes concerning them, for the future I propose to dedicate that volume to some gentle shepherd, whose thoughts proud science never taught to stray far as the statesman's walk or patriot way, yet simple nature to his hopes had given out of a cloud-capped head a humbler heaven, some untamed world in depths of wood embraced some happier island in the watery waste, and where admitted to that equal sky, his faithful dog should bear him company. In a word, by thus introducing an entire new set of objects to his imagination, I shall unavoidably give a diversion to his passionate and lovesick contemplations. In the meantime, I am the author. Book 9. Chapter 1. I call all the powers of time and chance, which severally check us in our careers in this world, to bear me witness, that I could never yet get fairly to my Uncle Toby. Amours, till this very moment, that my mother's curiosity, as she stated the affair, or a different impulse in her, as my father would have wished her to take a peep at them through the keyhole. Call it, my dear, by its right name, quoth my father, and look through the keyhole as long as you will. Nothing but the fermentation of that little subacid humor, which I have often spoken of, in my father's habit, could have vented such an insinuation. He was however frank and generous in his nature, and at all times open to conviction, so that he had scarce got to the last word of this ungracious retort, when his conscience smote him. My mother was then conjugally swinging with her left arm twisted under his right, in such wise, that the inside of her hand rested upon the back of his. She raised her fingers, and let them fall. It could scarce be called a tap. Or if it was a tap, 'twould have puzzled a casuist to say whether 'twas a tap of remonstrance or a tap of confession. My father, who was all sensibilities from head to foot, classed it right conscience redoubled her blow. He turned his face suddenly the other way, and my mother, supposing his body was about to turn with it in order to move homewards, by a cross movement of her right leg, keeping her left as its center, brought herself so far in front that as he turned his head, he met her eye confusion again. He saw 1,000 reasons to wipe out the reproach, and as many to reproach himself, a thin, blue, chill, pellucid crystal with all its humor so at rest. The least mote or speck of desire might have been seen, at the bottom of it, had it existed. It did not, and how I happened to be so lewd myself. particularly a little before the vernal and autumnal equinoxes. Heaven above knows my mother madam was, so at no time, either by nature, by institution, or example. A temperate current of blood ran orderly through her veins in all months of the year, and in all critical moments both of the day and night alike. Nor did she superinduce the least heat into her humors from the manual effervescencies of devotional tracts, which having little or no meaning in them, nature is oft-times obliged to find one. And as for my father's example, 'twas so far from being either aiding or abetting thereunto, that 'twas the whole business of his life to keep all fancies of that kind out of her head. Nature had done her part, to have spared him this trouble. And what was not a little inconsistent, my father knew it, and here am I sitting, this 12th day of August 1766, in a purple jerkin and yellow pair of slippers, without either wig or cap on, a most tragicomical completion of his prediction, that I should neither think nor act like any other man's child, upon that very account. The mistake in my father was in attacking my mother's motive instead of the act itself. For certainly keyholes were made for other purposes, and considering the act as an act which interfered with a true proposition and denied a keyhole to be what it was, it became a violation of nature, and was so far, you see, criminal. It is for this reason, and please your reverences, that keyholes are the occasions of more sin and wickedness than all other holes in this world put together. Which leads me to my Uncle Toby, S. Amours. Chapter 2. Though the corporal had been as good as his word in putting my Uncle Toby's great ramallywig into pipes, yet the time was too short to produce any great effects from it. It had lain many years squeezed up in the corner of his old campaign trunk. And as bad forms are not so easy to be got the better of, and the use of candle ends not so well understood, it was not so pliable a business as one would have wished. The corporal, with cheery eye and both arms extended, had fallen back perpendicular from it a score times, to inspire it, if possible, with a better air had spleen given a look at it. 'Twould have cost her ladyship a smilet curled everywhere, but where the corporal would have it. And where a buckle or two, in his opinion, would have done it honor, he could as soon have raised the dead. Such it was, or rather such would it have seemed upon any other brow. But the sweet look of goodness which sat upon my Uncle Toby's assimilated everything around it so sovereignly to itself, and nature had moreover wrote gentleman with so fair a hand in every line of his countenance, that even his tarnished gold-laced hat and huge cockade of flimsy taffeta became him. And though not worth a button in themselves, yet the moment my Uncle Toby put them on, they became serious objects, and altogether seemed to have been picked up by the hand of science to set him off to advantage. Nothing in this world could have cooperated more powerfully towards this than my Uncle Toby's blue and gold had not quantity in some measure been necessary to grace. In a period of 15 or 16 years since they had been made, by a total inactivity in my Uncle Toby's life. For he seldom went further than the bowling green. His blue and gold had become so miserably too straight for him, that it was with the utmost difficulty the corporal was able to get him into them. The taking them up at the sleeves was of no advantage. They were laced, however, down the back, and at the seams of the sides, and in the mode of King William's reign. And to shorten all description, they shone so bright against the sun that morning, and had so metallic and dowdy an air with them, that had my Uncle Toby thought of attacking in armor, nothing could have so well imposed upon his imagination. As for the thin scarlet breeches, they had been unripped by the tailor between the legs, and left at 6s and 7s. Yes, madam, but let us govern our fancies. It is enough they were held impracticable the night before, and as there was no alternative in my Uncle Toby's wardrobe, he sallied forth in the red plush. The corporal had arrayed himself in poor Lefever's regimental coat, and with his hair tucked up under his Montero cap, which he had furbished up for the occasion, marched 3 paces distant from his master. A whiff of military pride had puffed out his shirt at the wrist, and upon that, in a black leather thong clipped into a tassel beyond the knot, hung the corporal's stick. My Uncle Toby carried his cane like a pike. It looks well, at least, quoth my father to himself. Chapter 3. My Uncle Toby, his head more than once behind him, to see how he was supported by the corporal. And the corporal, as oft as he did it, gave a slight flourish with his stick, but not vaporingly, and with the sweetest accent of most respectful encouragement, bid his honor never fear. Now my Uncle Toby did fear, and grievously too. He knew not, as my father had reproached him, so much as the right end of a woman from the wrong, and therefore was never altogether at his ease near any one of them unless in sorrow or distress. Then infinite was his pity, nor would the most courteous knight of romance have gone further, at least upon one leg, to have wiped away a tear from a woman's eye. And yet, accepting once that he was beguiled into it by Mrs. Wadman, he had never looked steadfastly into one, and would often tell my father in the simplicity of his heart that it was almost, if not about, as bad as talking bawdy. And suppose it is, my father would say. Book 7. Chapter 1. No, I think, I said, I would write 2 volumes every year, provided the vile cough which then tormented me, and which to this hour I dread worse than the devil, would but give me leave-end in another place. But where, I can't recollect now, speaking of my book as a machine, and laying my pen and ruler down crosswise upon the table. In order to gain the greater credit to it, I swore it should be kept a-going at that rate these 40 years. If it pleased but the fountain of life to bless me so long with health and good spirits. Now as for my spirits, little have I to lay to their charge, nay, so very little, unless the mounting me upon a long stick and playing the fool with me 19 hours out of the 24, be accusations that, on the contrary, I have much to thank 'em for. Cheerily have ye made me tread the path of life with all the burthens of it, except its cares, upon my back. In no one moment of my existence, that I remember, have ye once deserted me, or tinged the objects which came in my way, either with sable or with a sickly green. In dangers ye gilded my horizon with hope, and when death himself knocked at my door ye bade him come again, and in so gay a tone of careless indifference did ye do it, that he doubted of his commission. There must certainly be some mistake in this matter, quoth he. Now there is nothing in this world I abominate worse than to be interrupted in a story, and I was that moment telling Eugenius a most tawdry one in my way, of a nun who fancied herself a shell-fish, and of a monk damned for eating a mussel, and was showing him the grounds and justice of the procedure. Did ever so grave a personage get into so vile a scrape? Quoth Death. Thou hast had a narrow escape, Tristram, said Eugenius, taking hold of my hand as I finished my story. But there is no living, Eugenius, replied I at this rate, for as this son of a whore has found out my lodgings. You call him rightly, said Eugenius, for by sin, we are told, he entered the world. I care not which way he entered. Quoth I, provided he be not in such a hurry to take me out with him, for I have 40 volumes to write, and 40,000 things to say and do which no body in the world will say and do for me, except thyself. And as thou seest, he has got me by the throat, for Eugenius could scarce hear me speak across the table, and that I am no match for him in the open field, had I not better, whilst these few scattered spirits remain, and these 2 spider legs of mine, holding one of them up to him, are able to support me, had I not better, Eugenius, fly for my life? Tease my advice, my dear Tristram, said Eugenius, then by heaven. I will lead him a dance he little thinks of, for I will gallop, quoth I, without looking once behind me, to the banks of the Garonne. And if I hear him clattering at my heels, I'll scamper away to Mount Vesuvius, from thence to Joppa, and from Joppa to the world's end, where, if he follows me, I pray God he may break his neck. He runs more risk there, said Eugenius, than thou. Eugenius's wit and affection brought blood into the cheek, from whence it had been some months banished. 'Twas a vile moment to bid adieu in. He led me to my chaise Allen's. Said I. The postboy gave a crack with his whip off. I went like a cannon, and in half a dozen bounds got into Dover. Chapter 2. Now hang it, quoth I, as I looked towards the French coast. A man should know something of his own country too, before he goes abroad, and I never gave a peep into Rochester Church, or took notice of the dock of Chatham, or visited St. Thomas at Canterbury, though they all 3 laid in my way. But mine, indeed, is a particular case. So without arguing the matter further with Thomas O. Becket, or anyone else, I skipped into the boat, and in 5 minutes we got under sail, and scudded away like the wind. Pray, captain, quoth I, as I was going down into the cabin, is a man never overtaken by death in this passage? Why, there is not time for a man to be sick in it, replied he. What a curse ye are! For I am sick as a horse, quoth I, already. What a brain, upside down. Heyday! The cells are broke loose one into another, and the blood and the lymph and the nervous juices with the fixed and volatile salts are all jumbled into one mass good G. Everything turns round in it like 1,000 whirlpools. I'd give a shilling to know if I shan't write the clearer for it. Sick, 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 sick. When shall we get to land? Captain, they have hearts like stones. Oh, I am deadly sick. Reach me that thing, boy. 'Tis the most discomfiting sickness. I wish I was at the bottom, madam. How is it with you? Undone, 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 sir. What, the first time? No, 'tis the second, third, sixth, 10th time, sir. Heyday, what a trampling overhead. Hollow, cabin boy, what's the matter? The wind chopped about, death, then I shall meet him full in the face. What luck, 'tis chopped about again, master. Oh, the devil chop it. Captain, quoth she, for heaven's sake, let us get ashore. Chapter 3. It is a great inconvenience to a man in a haste that there are 3 distinct roads between Calais and Paris, in behalf of which there is so much to be said by the several deputies from the towns which lie along them, that half a day is easily lost in settling which you'll take. First, the road by Lisle and Arras, which is the most about but most interesting and instructing. The second, that by Amiens, which you may go, if you would see Chantilly. And that by Beauvais, which you may go if you will. For this reason, a great many choose to go by Beauvais. Chapter 4. Now before I quit Calais, a travel writer would say, it would not be amiss to give some account of it. Now I think it very much amiss that a man cannot go quietly through a town and let it alone, when it does not meddle with him, but that he must be turning about and drawing his pen at every kennel he crosses over, merely my conscience for the sake of drawing it. Because, if we may judge from what has been wrote of these things, by all who have wrote and galloped, or who have galloped and wrote, which is a different way still. Or who, for more expedition than the rest, have wrote galloping, which is the way I do at present from the great Addison, who did it with his satchel of school books hanging at his and galling his beast's crupper at every stroke. There is not a galloper of us all who might not have gone on ambling quietly in his own ground, in case he had any, and have wrote all he had to write, drishad as well as not. For my own part, as heaven is my judge, and to which I shall ever make my last appeal, I know no more of Calais, except the little my barber told me of it as he was whetting his razor, than I do this moment of Grand Cairo. For it was dusky in the evening when I landed, and dark as pitch in the morning when I set out, and yet by merely knowing what is what, and by drawing this from that in one part of the town, and by spelling and putting this and that together in another, I would lay any traveling odds, that I this moment write a chapter upon Calais as long as my arm. And with so distinct and satisfactory a detail of every item, which is worth a stranger's curiosity in the town, that you would take me for the town clerk of Calais itself, and where, sir, would be the wonder? Was not Democritus, who laughed 10 times more than I, town clerk of Abdera? And was not, I forget his name, who had more discretion than us both, town clerk of Ephesus? It should be penned, moreover, sir, with so much knowledge and good sense and truth and precision. Nay, if you don't believe me, you may read the chapter for your pains. Chapter 5. Calais, Caladium, Calusium, Calesium. This town, if we may trust its archives, the authority of which I see no reason to call in question in this place, was once no more than a small village belonging to one of the first Counts de Guines, and as it boasts at present of no less than 14,000 inhabitants, exclusive of 420 distinct families in the Basseville, or suburbs, it must have grown up by little and little, I suppose, to its present size. Though there are 4 convents, there is but one parochial church in the whole town. I had not an opportunity of taking its exact dimensions, but it is pretty easy to make a tolerable conjecture of 'em, for as there are 14,000 inhabitants in the town. If the church holds them all, it must be considerably large, and, if it will not tease a very great pity, they have not another. It is built in form of a cross, and dedicated to the Virgin Mary. The steeple, which has a spire to it, is placed in the middle of the church, and stands upon 4 pillars, elegant and light enough, but sufficiently strong at the same time. It is decorated with 11 altars, most of which are rather fine than beautiful. The great altar is a masterpiece in its kind. 'Tis of white marble, and, as I was told, near 60 feet high. Had it been much higher, it had been as high as Mount Calvary itself. Therefore, I suppose it must be high enough in all conscience. There was nothing struck me more than the great square, though I cannot say 'tis either well paved or well built, but 'tis in the heart of the town, and most of the streets, especially those in that quarter, all terminate in it. Could there have been a fountain in all Calais, which it seems there cannot, as such an object would have been a great ornament, it is not to be doubted, but that the inhabitants would have had it in the very center of this square, not that it is properly a square, because 'tis 40 feet longer from east to west than from north to south, so that the French in general have more reason on their side in calling them places than squares, which, strictly speaking, to be sure, they are not. The town house seems to be but a sorry building, and not to be kept in the best repair. Otherwise it had been a second great ornament to this place. It answers, however, its destination, and serves very well for the reception of the magistrates, who assemble in it from time to time, so that, 'tis presumable, justice is regularly distributed. I have heard much of it, but there is nothing at all curious in the Kurgan. 'Tis a distinct quarter of the town, inhabited solely by sailors and fishermen. It consists of a number of small streets, neatly built and mostly of brick. 'Tis extremely populous, but as that may be accounted for, from the principles of their diet, there is nothing curious in that neither. A traveler may see it to satisfy himself, he must not omit however taking notice of La Tour de Guet, upon any account. 'Tis so called from its particular destination, because in war it serves to discover and give notice of the enemies which approach the place, either by sea or land. But 'tis monstrous high, and catches the eye so continually, you cannot avoid taking notice of it if you would. It was a singular disappointment to me that I could not have permission to take an exact survey of the fortifications, which are the strongest in the world, and which from first to last, that is, from the time they were set about by Philip of France, Count of Boulogne, to the present war, wherein many reparations were made, have cost, as I learned afterwards from an engineer in Gascony, above 100 millions of livres. It is very remarkable that at the Terre de Gravelines, and where the town is naturally the weakest, they have expended the most money, so that the outworks stretch a great way into the campaign, and consequently occupy a large tract of ground. However, after all that is said and done, it must be acknowledged that Calais was never upon any account so considerable from itself, as from its situation, and that easy entrance which it gave our ancestors, upon all occasions, into France. It was not without its inconveniences also, being no less troublesome to the English in those times than Dunkirk has been to us in ours, so that it was deservedly looked upon as the key to both kingdoms, which no doubt is the reason that there have arisen so many contentions who should keep it. Of these, the siege of Calais, or rather the blockade, for it was shut up both by land and sea, was the most memorable, as it withstood the efforts of Edward III a whole year, and was not terminated at last but by famine and extreme misery. The gallantry of Eustace de Saint-Pierre, who first offered himself a victim for his fellow citizens, has ranked his name with heroes. As it will not take up above 50 pages, it would be injustice to the reader not to give him a minute account of that romantic transaction, as well as of the siege itself, in Rapin's own words. Chapter 6. But courage, gentle reader. I scorn it 'tis enough to have thee in my power, but to make use of the advantage which the fortune of the pen has now gained over thee would be too much no. By that all-powerful fire which warms the visionary brain and lights the spirits through unworldly tracks. Ere I would force a helpless creature upon this hard service, and make thee pay, poor soul. For 50 pages, which I have no right to sell thee, naked as I am, I would browse upon the mountains, and smile that the north wind brought me neither my tent or my supper. So put on, my brave boy, and make the best of thy way to Boulogne. Chapter 7. Boulogne, ha, so we are all got together, debtors and sinners before heaven. A jolly set of us, but I can't stay and quaff it off with you. I'm pursued myself like 100 devils, and shall be overtaken before I can well change horses. For heaven's sake, make haste, 'tis for high treason, quoth a very little man, whispering as low as he could to a very tall man that stood next him, or else for murder. Quoth the tall man, well thrown, sighs Ace. Quoth, I know, quoth a third, the gentleman has been committing. Ah, ma cheerful, said I, as she tripped by from her matins. You look as rosy as the morning, for the sun was rising, and it made the compliment the more gracious. No, it can't be that, quoth a fourth. She made a curtsy to me, I kissed my hand. 'Tis debt, continued he. 'Tis certainly for debt, quoth a fifth. I would not pay that gentleman's debts, quoth Ace, for 1,000 pounds, nor would I, quoth Sighs, for 6 times the sum. Well thrown, sighs Ace again. Quoth I, but I have no debt but the debt of nature, and I want but patience of her, and I will pay her every farthing I owe her. How can you be so hard-hearted, madam, to arrest a poor traveler going along without molestation to anyone upon his lawful occasions? Do stop that death-looking, long-striding scoundrel of a scarce sinner, who is posting after me. He never would have followed me, but for you, if it be but for a stage or two, just to give me start of him, I beseech you, madam, do, dear lady. Now, in troth, 'tis a great pity, quoth mine Irish host, that all this good courtship should be lost, for the young gentlewoman has been after going out of hearing of it all along. Simpleton, quoth I. So you have nothing else in Boulogne worth seeing? By Jassus, there is the finest seminary for the humanities. There cannot be a finer, quoth I. Chapter 8. When the precipitancy of a man's wishes hurries on his ideas 90 times faster than the vehicle he rides in, woe be to truth. And woe be to the vehicle and its tackling. Let him be made of what stuff you will upon which he breathes forth the disappointment of his soul. As I never give general characters either of men or things in choler, the most haste the worse speed, was all the reflection I made upon the affair, the first time it happened. The second, third, fourth, and fifth time, I confined it respectively to those times, and accordingly blamed only the second, third, fourth, and fifth postboy for it, without carrying my reflections further. But the event continuing to befoul me from the fifth to the sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, and 10th time, and without one exception, I then could not avoid making a national reflection of it, which I do in these words. That something is always wrong in a French postchaise, upon first setting out. Or the proposition may stand thus. A French postilion has always to alight before he has got 300 yards out of town. What's wrong now, diable? A rope's broke, a knot has slipped, a staple's drawn, a bolt's to whittle, a tag, a rag, a jag, a strap, a buckle, or a buckle's tongue want altering. Now true as all this is, I never think myself empowered to excommunicate thereupon either the postchaise or its driver, nor do I take it into my head to swear by the living G. I would rather go afoot 10,000 times or that I will be damned, if ever I get into another, but I take the matter coolly before me, and consider that some tag, or rag, or jag, or bolt, or buckle, or buckle's tongue will ever be a wanting or want altering, travel where I will so I never chaff. But take the good and the bad as they fall in my road, and get on. Do so, my lad, said I. He had lost 5 minutes already, in alighting in order to get at a luncheon of black bread, which he had crammed into the chaise pocket, and was remounted and going leisurely on, to relish it the better. Get on, my lad, said I, briskly but in the most persuasive tone imaginable, for I jingled a 4.20 piece against the glass, taking care to hold the flat side towards him, as he looked back. The dog grinned intelligence from his right ear to his left, and behind his sooty muzzle discovered such a pearly row of teeth that sovereignty would have pawned her jewels for them. Just heaven, what masticators, what bread! And so, as he finished the last mouthful of it, we entered the town of Montreuil. Chapter 9. There is not a town in all France which, in my opinion, looks better in the map than Montreuil. I own, it does not look so well in the book of post roads, but when you come to see it, to be sure it looks most pitifully. There is one thing, however, in it at present very handsome, and that is the innkeeper's daughter. She has been 18 months at Amiens, and 6 at Paris, in going through her classes, so knits and sews and dances and does the little coquetries very well. A slut. In running them over within these 5 minutes that I have stood looking at her, she has let fall at least a dozen loops in a white thread stocking. Yes, I see, you cunning gypsy. 'Tis long and taper, you need not pin it to your knee, and that 'tis your own end fits you exactly. That nature should have told this creature a word about a statue's thumb. But as this sample is worth all their thumbs besides, I have her thumbs and fingers in at the bargain, if they can be any guide to me. And as Janatone withal, for that is her name, stands so well for a drawing, may I never draw more, or rather may I draw like a draught horse, by main strength all the days of my life, if I do not draw her in all her proportions, and with as determined a pencil, as if I had her in the wettest drapery. But your worships choose rather that I give you the length, breadth, and perpendicular height of the great parish church, or drawing of the façade of the Abbey of St. Austerbert, which has been transported from Artois hither. Everything is just, I suppose, as the masons and carpenters left them. And if the belief in Christ continues so long, will be so these 50 years to come, so your worships and reverences may all measure them at your leisures, but he who measures thee, Janatone, must do it now. Thou carriest the principles of change within thy frame, and considering the chances of a transitory life, I would not answer for thee a moment. Ere twice 12 months are past and gone, thou mayest grow out like a pumpkin, and lose thy shapes, or thou mayest go off like a flower, and lose thy beauty, nay, thou mayest go off like a hussy and lose thyself. I would not answer for my Aunt Dinah, was she alive, faith, scarce for her picture were it, but painted by Reynolds. But if I go on with my drawing, after naming that son of Apollo, I'll be shot. So you must e'en be content with the original, which, if the evening is fine in passing thro' Montreuil, you will see at your chaise door as you change horses. But unless you have as bad a reason for haste as I have, you had better stop. She has a little of the devote, but that, sir, is a terce to a 9 in your favor. L help me, I could not count a single point, so had been piqued and repiqued and capoted to the devil. Chapter 10. All which being considered, and that death moreover might be much nearer me than I imagined, I wish I was at Abbeville, quoth I, were it only to see how they card and spin. So off we set. De Montreuil à Nampont, post at Demi de Nampont à Bernay, post de Bernay à Nouvion, a post de Nouvion à Abbeville, post. But the carders and spinners were all gone to bed. Footnote 7.1, vid. Book of French Post Rhodes, page 36, edition of 1762. Chapter 26. What a tract of country have I run! How many degrees nearer to the warm sun am I advanced, and how many fair and goodly cities have I seen during the time you have been reading and reflecting, madam, upon this story. There's Fontainebleau, and Sens, and Joigny, and Auxerre, and Dijon the capital of Burgundy, and Chalon, and Macon the capital of the Mâconnais, and a score more upon the road to Lyon, and, now I have run them over, I might as well talk to you of so many market towns in the moon, as tell you one word about them. It will be this chapter at the least, if not both this and the next entirely lost, do what I will. Why, 'tis a strange story, Tristram. Alas, madam, had it been upon some melancholy lecture of the cross, the peace of meekness, or the contentment of resignation, I had not been incommoded. Or had I thought of writing it upon the purer abstractions of the soul, and that food of wisdom and holiness and contemplation, upon which the spirit of man, when separated from the body, is to subsist, for ever you would have come with a better appetite from it. I wish I never had wrote it. But as I never blot anything out, let us use some honest means to get it out of our heads directly. Pray reach me my fool's cap. I fear you sit upon it, madam, 'tis under the cushion, I'll put it on. Bless me, you have had it upon your head this half hour. There then let it stay, with it. Fara diddle dee, and a fari diddle dee, and a high dum di dum fiddle dums. And now, madam, we may venture, I hope, a little to go on. Chapter 27. All you need say of Fontainebleau, in case you are asked, is that it stands about 40 miles, south something from Paris, in the middle of a large forest, that there is something great in it, that the king goes there once every 2 or 3 years, with his whole court, for the pleasure of the chase, and that, during that carnival of sporting, any English gentleman of fashion, you need not forget yourself, may be accommodated with a nag or two, to partake of the sport, taking care only not to outgallop the king. Though there are 2 reasons why you need not talk loud of this to everyone. First, because 'twill make the said nags the harder to be got, and secondly, 'tis not a word of it true, Allen's. As for Sens, you may dispatch in a word, 'tis an archiepiscopal see. For Joigny the less, I think, one says of it the better. But for Auxerre I could go on forever. For in my grand tour through Europe, in which after all my father, not caring to trust me with anyone, attended me himself, with my Uncle Toby, and Trim and Obadiah, and indeed most of the family, except my mother, who being taken up with a project of knitting my father a pair of large worsted breeches. The thing is common sense. And she not caring to be put out of her way, she stayed at home, at Shandy Hall, to keep things right during the expedition. In which, I say, my father stopping us 2 days at Auxerre, and his researches being ever of such a nature, that they would have found fruit even in a desert, he has left me enough to say upon Auxerre. In short, wherever my father went, but 'twas more remarkably so, in this journey through France and Italy, than in any other stages of his life, his road seemed to lie so much on one side of that, wherein all other travelers have gone before him. He saw kings and courts and silks of all colors. In such strange lights and his remarks and reasonings upon the characters, the manners, and customs of the countries we passed over were so opposite to those of all other mortal men, particularly those of my Uncle Toby and Trim, to say nothing of myself, and to crown all the occurrences and scrapes which we were perpetually meeting and getting into. In consequence of his systems and opiniatry, they were of so odd, so mixed and tragicomical a contexture that the whole put together, it appears of so different a shade and tint from any tour of Europe, which was ever executed, that I will venture to pronounce the fault must be mine, and mine only if it be not read by all travelers and travel readers, till traveling is no more, or which comes to the same point till the world, finally, takes it into its head to stand still. But this rich bale is not to be opened now, except a small thread or two of it, merely to unravel the mystery of my father's stay at Auxerre. As I have mentioned, it is too slight to be kept suspended, and when 'tis wove in, there is an end of it. "We'll go, brother Toby," said my father, "whilst dinner is coddling to the Abbey of Saint Germain, if it be only to see these bodies, of which Monsieur Sequier has given such a recommendation." "I'll go see any body," quoth my Uncle Toby, for he was all compliance through every step of the journey. "Defend me." Said my father, "They are all mummies, then one need not shave." Quoth my Uncle Toby, "Shave." "No," cried my father, "'twill be more like relations to go with our beards on." So out we sallied, the corporal lending his master his arm, and bringing up the rear to the Abbey of Saint Germain. "Everything is very fine, and very rich, and very superb, and very magnificent," said my father, addressing himself to the sacristan, who was a younger brother of the order of Benedictines. "But our curiosity has led us to see the bodies, of which Monsieur Sequier has given the world so exact a description." The sacristan made a bow, and lighting a torch first, which he had always in the vestry ready for the purpose, he led us into the tomb of Saint Haribald. "This," said the sacristan, laying his hand upon the tomb, "was a renowned prince of the House of Bavaria, who under the successive reigns of Charlemagne, Louis le Debonair, and Charles the Bald, bore a great sway in the government, and had a principal hand in bringing everything into order and discipline. Then he has been as great," said my uncle, "in the field, as in the cabinet. I dare say he has been a gallant soldier. He was a monk," said the sacristan. My Uncle Toby and Trim sought comfort in each other's faces, but found it not. My father clapped both his hands upon his codpiece, which was a way he had when anything hugely tickled him. For though he hated a monk, and the very smell of a monk worse than all the devils in hell, yet the shot hitting my Uncle Toby and Trim so much harder than him, 'twas a relative triumph, and put him into the gayest humor in the world. "And pray, what do you call this gentleman?" quoth my father rather sportingly. "This tomb," said the young Benedictine, looking downwards, "contains the bones of Saint Maxima, who came from Ravenna on purpose to touch the body." "Of Saint Maximus," said my father, popping in with his saint before him. "They were two of the greatest saints in the whole martyrology." Added my father, "Excuse me," said the sacristan, "was to touch the bones of Saint Germain, the builder of the abbey, and what did she get by it?" Said my Uncle Toby, "What does any woman get by it?" Said my father, "Martyrdom," replied the young Benedictine, making a bow down to the ground, and uttering the word with so humble but decisive a cadence, it disarmed my father for a moment. "'Tis supposed," continued the Benedictine, "that Saint Maxima has lain in this tomb 400 years, and 200 before her canonization. 'Tis but a slow rise, brother Toby," quoth my father, "in this self-same army of martyrs." "A desperate slow one, and please your honor," said Trim. "Unless one could purchase, I should rather sell out entirely." Quoth my Uncle Toby, "I am pretty much of your opinion, brother Toby," said my father. "Poor Saint Maxima," said my Uncle Toby low to himself as we turned from her tomb. "She was one of the fairest and most beautiful ladies either of Italy or France," continued the sacristan, "but who the deuce has got lain down here besides her?" Quoth my father, pointing with his cane to a large tomb as we walked on it. "Is Saint Optat, sir," answered the sacristan, "and properly is Saint Optat plaqued." Said my father, "And what is Saint Optat's story?" continued he. "Saint Optat," replied the sacristan, "was a bishop." "I thought so, by heaven," cried my father, interrupting him. "Saint Optat, how should Saint Optat fail?" So, snatching out his pocket-book, and the young Benedictine holding him the torch as he wrote, he set it down as a new prop to his system of Christian names, and I will be bold to say, so disinterested was he in the search of truth, that had he found a treasure in St. Optat's tomb, it would not have made him half so rich. 'Twas as successful a short visit as ever was paid to the dead. And so highly was his fancy pleased with all that had passed in it, that he determined at once to stay another day in Auxerre. "I'll see the rest of these good gentry tomorrow," said my father, as we crossed over the square, "and while you are paying that visit, brother Shandy, quoth my Uncle Toby the corporal and I will mount the ramparts." Chapter 28. Now this is the most puzzled skein of all four in this last chapter. As far at least as it has helped me through Auxerre, I have been getting forwards in two different journeys together, and with the same dash of the pen for I have got entirely out of Auxerre in this journey which I am writing now, and I am got halfway out of Auxerre in that which I shall write hereafter. There is but a certain degree of perfection in everything. And by pushing at something beyond that I have brought myself into such a situation, as no traveler ever stood before me. For I am this moment walking across the marketplace of Auxerre with my father and my Uncle Toby, in our way back to dinner, and I am this moment also entering Lyon with my post-chaise broke into 1,000 pieces, and I am moreover this moment in a handsome pavilion built by Pringello, upon the banks of the Garonne, which Mons. Slignac has lent me, and where I now sit rhapsodizing all these affairs. Let me collect myself and pursue my journey. Footnote 7.4. The same Don Pringello, the celebrated Spanish architect, of whom my cousin Antony has made such honorable mention in a scholium to the tale inscribed to his name. Vid. p. 129, small edit. Chapter 34. My father had such a skirmishing, cutting kind of a slashing way with him, in his disputations, thrusting and ripping, and giving everyone a stroke to remember him by in his turn that, if there were 20 people in company in less than half an hour, he was sure to have every one of them against him. What did not a little contribute to leave him thus without an ally, was, that if there was any one post more untenable than the rest, he would be sure to throw himself into it. And to do him justice, when he was once there, he would defend it so gallantly, that 'twould have been a concern, either to a brave man or a good-natured one, to have seen him driven out. Yorick, for this reason, though he would often attack him, yet could never bear to do it with all his force. Dr. Slop's virginity, in the close of the last chapter, had got him for once on the right side of the rampart, and he was beginning to blow up all the convents in Christendom about Slop's ears, when Corporal Trim came into the parlor to inform my Uncle Toby that his thin scarlet breeches, in which the attack was to be made upon Mrs. Wadman, would not do. For that the tailor, in ripping them up in order to turn them, had found they had been turned before then turn them again. "Brother," said my father rapidly, "for there will be many a turning of 'em, yet before all's done in the affair they are as rotten as dirt." Said the corporal, "Then by all means," said my father, "bespeak a new pair, brother, for though I know," continued my father, turning himself to the company, "that widow Wadman has been deeply in love with my brother Toby for many years, and has used every art and circumvention of woman to outwit him into the same passion. Yet now that she has caught him her fever will be past its height. She has gained her point. In this case," continued my father, "which Plato, I am persuaded, never thought of love, you see, is not so much a sentiment as a situation, into which a man enters, as my brother Toby would do, into a corps, no matter whether he loves the service or no, being once in it he acts as if he did, and takes every step to show himself a man of prowess." The hypothesis, like the rest of my father's, was plausible enough, and my Uncle Toby had but a single word to object to it in, which Trim stood ready to second him, but my father had not drawn his conclusion. "For this reason," continued my father, stating the case over again, "notwithstanding all the world knows, that Mrs. Wadman affects my brother Toby, and my brother Toby, contrariwise, affects Mrs. Wadman, and no obstacle in nature to forbid the music striking up this very night, yet will I answer for it, that this self-same tune will not be played this 12-month. We have taken our measures badly," quoth my Uncle Toby, looking up interrogatively in Trim's face. "I would lay my Montero cap," said Trim. Now Trim's Montero cap, as I once told you, was his constant wager, and having furbished it up that very night, in order to go upon the attack, it made the odds look more considerable. "I would lay, and please your honor, my Montero cap to a shilling. Was it proper," continued Trim, making a bow, "to offer a wager before your honors?" "There is nothing improper in it," said my father, "'tis a mode of expression. For in saying thou wouldst lay thy Montero cap to a shilling, all thou meanest is this, that thou believest. Now what dost thou believe? That widow Wadman, and please your worship, cannot hold it out 10 days. And whence, cried Slop, jeeringly, hast thou all this knowledge of woman, friend? By falling in love with a popish clergywoman, said Trim. 'Twas a beguine, said my Uncle Toby. Dr. Slop was too much in wrath to listen to the distinction, and my father, taking that very crisis to fall in helter-skelter upon the whole order of nuns and beguines, a set of silly, fusty, baggages slop, could not stand at hand my Uncle Toby having some measures to take about his breeches and Yorick, about his 4th general division in order for their several attacks. Next day the company broke up. And my father being left alone, and having half an hour upon his hands betwixt that and bedtime, he called for pen, ink, and paper, and wrote my Uncle Toby the following letter of instructions. My dear brother Toby, what I am going to say to thee is upon the nature of women, and of love-making to them. And perhaps it is as well for thee, though not so well for me, that thou hast occasion for a letter of instructions upon that head, and that I am able to write it to thee. Had it been the good pleasure of him who disposes of our lots, and thou no suffer by the knowledge, I had been well content that thou shouldst have dipped the pen this moment into the ink, instead of myself. But that not being the case, Mrs. Shandy being now close beside me, preparing for bed, I have thrown together without order, and just as they have come into my mind, such hints and documents as I deem may be of use to thee, intending, in this, to give thee a token of my love, not doubting, my dear Toby, of the manner in which it will be accepted. In the first place, with regard to all which concerns religion in the affair, though I perceive from a glow in my cheek that I blush as I begin to speak to thee upon the subject, as well knowing, notwithstanding thy unaffected secrecy, how few of its offices thou neglectest, yet I would remind thee of one, during the continuance of thy courtship, in a particular manner, which I would not have omitted. And that is, never to go forth upon the enterprise, whether it be in the morning or the afternoon, without first recommending thyself to the protection of Almighty God, that he may defend thee from the evil one. Shave the whole top of thy crown clean once at least every 4 or 5 days, but oftener if convenient, lest in taking off thy wig before her, throw, absence of mind, she should be able to discover how much has been cut away by time, how much by trim. 'Twere better to keep ideas of baldness out of her fancy. Always carry it in thy mind, and act upon it as a sure maxim, Toby, that women are timid, and 'tis well they are, else there would be no dealing with them. Let not thy breeches be too tight, or hang too loose about thy thighs, like the trunk hose of our ancestors. A just medium prevents all conclusions. Whatever thou hast to say, be it more or less, forget not to utter it in a low, soft tone of voice. Silence, and whatever approaches it, weaves dreams of midnight secrecy into the brain. For this cause, if thou canst help it, never throw down the tongs and poker. Avoid all kinds of pleasantry and facetiousness in thy discourse with her, and do whatever lies in thy power at the same time to keep from her all books and writings which tend thereto. There are some devotional tracts, which if thou canst entice her to read over, it will be well. But suffer her not to look into Rabelais, or Scarron, or Don Quixote. They are all books which excite laughter, and thou knowest, dear Toby, that there is no passion so serious as lust. Stick a pin in the bosom of thy shirt before thou enterest her parlor. And if thou art permitted to sit upon the same sofa with her, and she gives the occasion to lay thy hand upon hers, beware of taking it, thou canst not lay thy hand on hers, but she will feel the temper of thine. Leave that and as many other things as thou canst, quite undetermined. By so doing, thou wilt have her curiosity on thy side. And if she is not conquered by that, and thy essay continues still kicking, which there is great reason to suppose thou must begin, with first losing a few ounces of blood below the ears, according to the practice of the ancient Scythians, who cured the most intemperate fits of the appetite by that means. Avicenna, after this, is for having the part anointed with the syrup of hellebore, using proper evacuations and purges, and I believe rightly. But thou must eat little or no goat's flesh, nor red deer, nor even foal's flesh by any means, and carefully abstain, that is, as much as thou canst, from peacocks, cranes, coots, didappers, and water hens. As for thy drink, I need not tell thee, it must be the infusion of vervain and the herbhania, of which alien relates such effects but if thy stomach palls with it discontinue it from time to time, taking cucumbers, melons, purslane, water lilies, woodbine, and lettuce, in the stead of them. There is nothing further for thee, which occurs to me at present, unless the breaking out of a fresh war, so wishing everything, dear Toby, for the best. I rest thy affectionate brother, Walter Shandy. Chapter 38. When we arrived at the Shays Vamper's house, both the house and the shop were shut up. It was the 8th of September, the nativity of the blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God. Tantara, ra tantivy, the whole world was gone out a maypoling frisking here capering there nobody cared a button for me or my remarks. So I sat me down upon a bench by the door, philosophating upon my condition. By a better fate than usually attends me, I had not waited half an hour, when the mistress came in to take the papiliotes from off her hair, before she went to the maypoles. The French women, by the by, love maypoles, à la folie that is, as much as their matins give 'em but a maypole. Whether in May, June, July, or September they never count the times down it goes 'tis meat, drink, washing, and lodging to end had we but the policy, and please your worships, as wood is a little scarce in France, to send them but plenty of maypoles. The women would set them up, and when they had done, they would dance round them and the men for company, till they were all blind. The wife of the Shays Vamper stepped in, I told you, to take the papiliotes from off her hair. The toilet stands still, for no man, so she jerked off her cap, to begin with them as she opened the door, in doing which, one of them fell upon the ground. I instantly saw it was my own writing. "Oh, seigneur," cried I, "you have got all my remarks upon your head, madam." "Jn sways bien mortifié," said she. "'Tis well," thinks I, "they have stuck there, for could they have gone deeper, they would have made such confusion in a French woman's noddle she had better have gone with it unfrizzled, to the day of eternity." Tenez said she so without any idea of the nature of my suffering. She took them from her curls, and put them gravely one by one into my hat. One was twisted this way, another twisted that. I, by my faith, and when they are published, quoth I, they will be worse twisted still. Chapter 39. "And now for Lippius's clock," said I, with the air of a man who had got through all his difficulties. "Nothing can prevent us seeing that, and the Chinese history, and see, except the time," said Francois, "for 'tis almost 11, then we must speed the faster," said I, striding it away to the cathedral. I cannot say, in my heart, that it gave me any concern in being told by one of the minor canons, as I was entering the west door, that Lippius's great clock was all out of joints, and had not gone for some years. It will give me the more time, thought I, to peruse the Chinese history. And besides, I shall be able to give the world a better account of the clock in its decay than I could have done in its flourishing condition. And so away, I posted to the College of the Jesuits. Now it is with the project of getting a peep at the history of China in Chinese characters, as with many others I could mention, which strike the fancy only at a distance. For as I came nearer and nearer to the point my blood cooled, the freak gradually went off, till at length I would not have given a chair a stone to have it gratified. The truth was, my time was short, and my heart was at the tomb of the lovers. I wish to God, said I, as I got the wrapper in my hand, that the key of the library may be but lost. It fell out as well, for all the Jesuits had got the colic, and to that degree, as never was known in the memory of the oldest practitioner. Chapter 40. As I knew the geography of the tomb of the lovers, as well as if I had lived 20 years in Lyon, namely, that it was upon the turning of my right hand, just without the gate, leading to the Fauxbourg de Vase, I dispatched Francois to the boat, that I might pay the homage I so long owed it. Without a witness of my weakness, I walked with all imaginable joy towards the place. When I saw the gate which intercepted the tomb, my heart glowed within me. Tender and faithful spirits, cried I, addressing myself to Amandescend Amanda, long have I tarried to drop this tear upon your tomb. I come. When I came there was no tomb to drop it upon. What would I have given for my Uncle Toby, to have whistled Lillibolero? Chapter 41. No matter how, or in what mood, but I flew from the tomb of the lovers, or rather I did not fly from it, for there was no such thing existing, and just got time enough to the boat to save my passage. And ere I had sailed 100 yards, the Rhone and the Seine met together, and carried me down merrily betwixt them. But I have described this voyage down the Rhone, before I made it. So now I am at Avignon, and as there is nothing to see but the old house, in which the Duke of Ormond resided, and nothing to stop me but a short remark upon the place, in 3 minutes you will see me crossing the bridge upon a mule, with Francois upon a horse with my portmanteau behind him, and the owner of both, striding the way before us, with a long gun upon his shoulder and a sword under his arm, lest peradventure we should run away with his cattle. Had you seen my breeches in entering Avignon, though you'd have seen them better, I think, as I mounted you would not have thought the precaution amiss, or found in your heart to have taken it in dudgeon. For my own part, I took it most kindly, and determined to make him a present of them when we got to the end of our journey, for the trouble they had put him to, of arming himself at all points against them. Before I go further, let me get rid of my remark upon Avignon, which is this: that I think it wrong, merely because a man's hat has been blown off his head by chance the first night he comes to Avignon, that he should therefore say, Avignon is more subject to high winds than any town in all France. For which reason I laid no stress upon the accident till I had inquired of the master of the inn about it, who telling me seriously it was so, and hearing, moreover, the windiness of Avignon spoke of in the country about as a proverb, I set it down, merely to ask the learned what can be the cause the consequence I saw, for they are all dukes, marquises, and counts, there the duce a baron, in all Avignon, so that there is scarce any talking to them on a windy day. Prithee, friend, said I, take hold of my mule for a moment, for I wanted to pull off one of my jackboots, which hurt my heel. The man was standing quite idle at the door of the inn, and as I had taken it into my head, he was some way concerned about the house or stable, I put the bridle into his hand, so begun with the boot. When I had finished the affair, I turned about to take the mule from the man, and thank him. But Monsieur le Marquis had walked in. Chapter 42. I had now the whole south of France, from the banks of the Rhone to those of the Garonne, to traverse upon my mule at my own leisure, for I had left death. The Lord knows, and he only, how far behind me. I have followed many a man through France, quoth he, but never at this meddlesome rate. Still he followed, and still I fled him, but I fled him cheerfully. Still he pursued, but, like one who pursued his prey without hope as he lagged, every step he lost softened his looks. Why should I fly him at this rate? So notwithstanding all the commissary of the post office had said, I changed the mode of my traveling once more, and, after so precipitate and rattling a course as I had run, I flattered my fancy with thinking of my mule, and that I should traverse the rich plains of Languedoc upon his back, as slowly as foot could fall. There is nothing more pleasing to a traveler or more terrible to travel writers than a large rich plain, especially if it is without great rivers or bridges, and presents nothing to the eye but one unvaried picture of plenty, for after they have once told you that 'tis delicious, or delightful, as the case happens, that the soil was grateful, and that nature pours out all her abundance and sea, they have then a large plain upon their hands, which they know not what to do with, and which is of little or no use to them, but to carry them to some town, and that town, perhaps of little more, but a new place to start from to the next plain, and so on. This is most terrible work. Judge if I don't manage my plains better. Chapter 43. I had not gone above 2 leagues and a half, before the man with his gun began to look at his priming. I had 3 several times loitered terribly behind, half a mile at least every time. Once, in deep conference with a drum maker, who was making drums for the fairs of Beaucaire and Tarascon, I did not understand the principles. The second time, I cannot so properly say, I stopped for meeting a couple of Franciscans straitened more for time than myself, and not being able to get to the bottom of what I was about, I had turned back with them. The third was an affair of trade with a gossip, for a hand basket of Provence figs for 4 sous. This would have been transacted at once, but for a case of conscience at the close of it. For when the figs were paid for, it turned out that there were 2 dozen of eggs covered over with vine leaves at the bottom of the basketas. I had no intention of buying eggs. I made no sort of claim of them, as for the space they had occupied, what signified it? I had figs eno for my money. But it was my intention to have the basket, it was the gossip's intention to keep it, without which, She could do nothing with her eggs, and unless I had the basket, I could do as little with my figs, which were too ripe already, and most of 'em burst at the side. This brought on a short contention, which terminated in sundry proposals, what we should both do. How we disposed of our eggs and figs, I defy you, or the devil himself, had he not been there, which I am persuaded he was, to form the least probable conjecture. You will read the whole of it not this year, for I am hastening to the story of my Uncle Toby's amours, but you will read it in the collection of those which have arose out of the journey across this plain end, which therefore I call my plain stories. How far my pen has been fatigued, like those of other travelers, in this journey of it, over so barren a track the world must judge but the traces of it, which are now all set vibrating together this moment. Tell me, 'tis the most fruitful and busy period of my life. For as I had made no convention with my man with the gun, as to time by stopping and talking to every soul I met, who was not in a full trot joining all parties, before me waiting for every soul behind hailing all those who were coming through crossroads, arresting all kinds of beggars, pilgrims, fiddlers, friars, not passing by a woman in a mulberry tree without commending her legs, and tempting her into conversation with a pinch of snuff, in short, by seizing every handle, of what size or shape soever, which chance held out to me in this journey, I turned my plain into a city. I was always in company, and with great variety too. And as my mule loved society as much as myself, and had some proposals always on his part, to offer to every beast he met, I am confident we could have passed through Pall Mall, or St. James's Street for a month together, with fewer adventures and seen less of human nature. Oh, there is that sprightly frankness, which at once unpins every plait of a Languedocian's dress, that, whatever is beneath it, it looks so like the simplicity which poets sing of in better days. I will delude my fancy, and believe it is so. 'Twas in the road betwixt Nismes and Lunel, where there is the best Moscato wine in all France, and which by the by belongs to the honest canons of Montpellier, and befoul the man who has drank it at their table, who grudges them a drop of it. The sun was set, they had done their work. The nymphs had tied up their hair afresh, and the swains were preparing for a carousal. My mule made a dead point, teased the fife and tabor in. Said I am frightened to death. Quoth he, they are running at the ring of pleasure, said I, giving him a prick by St. Bougar, and all the saints at the backside of the door of purgatory, said he, making the same resolution with the abbess of Andwillets. I'll not go a step further, 'tis very well, sir, said I never will argue a point with one of your family, as long as I live. So leaping off his back, and kicking off one boot into this ditch, and t'other into that, I'll take a dance, said I, so stay you here. A sunburnt daughter of labor rose up from the group to meet me, as I advanced towards them. Her hair, which was a dark chestnut approaching rather to a black, was tied up in a knot, all but a single tress. We want a cavalier, said she, holding out both her hands, as if to offer them, and a cavalier ye shall have, said I, taking hold of both of them. Hadst thou, Nanette, been arrayed like a duchess? But that cursed slit in thy petticoat. Nanette cared not for it. We could not have done without you, said she, letting go one hand with self-taught politeness, leading me up with the other. A lame youth, whom Apollo had recompensed with a pipe, and to which he had added a taborin of his own accord, ran sweetly over the prelude, as he sat upon the bank. Tie me up this tress instantly, said Nanette. Putting a piece of string into my hand, it taught me to forget I was a stranger. The whole knot fell down. We had been 7 years acquainted. The youth struck the note upon the taborin, his pipe followed, and off we bounded, the duce take that slit. The sister of the youth, who had stolen her voice from heaven, sung alternately with her brother. It was a Gascogne roundelay. Viva la joie, fidon la tristesse. The nymphs joined in unison, and their swains an octave below them. I would have given a crown to have it sewed up. Nanette would not have given a sous. Viva la joie was in her lips, viva la joie was in her eyes. A transient spark of amity shot across the space betwixt us. She looked amiable. Why could I not live and end my days thus? Just disposer of our joys and sorrows, cried I. Why could not a man sit down in the lap of content here and dance, and sing, and say his prayers, and go to heaven with this nut-brown maid? Capriciously did she bend her head on one side, and dance up insidious. Then, 'tis time to dance off, quoth I. So changing only partners and tunes, I danced it away from Lunel to Montpellier, from thence to Pesquennes, Béziers. I danced it along through Narbonne, Carcassonne, and Castelnaudary. till at last I danced myself into Perdrillo's pavilion, where pulling out a paper of black lines, that I might go on straight forwards, without digression or parenthesis, in my Uncle Toby, S. Amours. I begun thus. Book 8. Chapter 1. But softly for in these sportive plains, and under this genial sun, where at this instant all flesh is running out piping, fiddling, and dancing to the vintage, and every step that's taken, the judgment is surprised by the imagination, I defy, notwithstanding all that has been said upon straight lines in sundry pages of my book, I defy the best cabbage planter that ever existed, whether he plants backwards or forwards. It makes little difference in the account, except that he will have more to answer for in the one case than in the other. I defy him to go on coolly, critically, and canonically, planting his cabbages one by one, in straight lines and stoical distances, especially if slits in petticoats are unsewed up without ever and anon straddling out, or sidling into some bastardly digression in Friesland, Fogland, and some other lands I wot of it may be done. But in this clear climate of fantasy and perspiration, where every idea, sensible and insensible, gets vent in this land, my dear Eugenius, in this fertile land of chivalry and romance, where I now sit, unscrewing my inkhorn to write my Uncle Toby's amours, and with all the meanders of Julia's track in quest of her Diego, in full view of my study window, if thou comest not and takest me by the hand. What a work it is likely to turn out. Let us begin it. Chapter 2. It is with love as with cuckoldom. But now I am talking of beginning a book, and have long had a thing upon my mind to be imparted to the reader, which, if not imparted now, can never be imparted to him as long as I live. Whereas the comparison may be imparted to him any hour in the day, I'll just mention it, and begin in good earnest. The thing is this: that of all the several ways of beginning a book which are now in practice throughout the known world, I am confident my own way of doing it is the best. I'm sure it is the most religious, for I begin with writing the first sentence and trusting to Almighty God for the second. 'Twould cure an author forever of the fuss and folly of opening his street door, and calling in his neighbors and friends and kinsfolk, with the devil and all his imps, with their hammers and engines, and see, only to observe how one sentence of mine follows another, and how the plan follows the whole. I wish you saw me half starting out of my chair, with what confidence, as I grasp the elbow of it, I look up, catching the idea, even sometimes before it halfway reaches me. I believe in my conscience, I intercept many a thought which heaven intended for another man. Pope in his portrait, "Are fools to me no martyr," is ever so full of faith or fire. I wish I could say of good works too, but I have no zeal or anger or zeal. Until gods and men agree together to call it by the same name, the errantist Tartuffe, in science, in politics, or in religion, shall never kindle a spark within me, or have a worse word, or a more unkind greeting, than what he will read in the next chapter. Chapter 3. Bonjour, good morrow, so you have got your cloak on betimes. But 'tis a cold morning, and you judge the matter rightly. 'Tis better to be well mounted than go foot-hand obstructions in the glands are dangerous. And how goes it with thy concubine, thy wife, and thy little ones both sides? And when did you hear from the old gentleman and lady your sister, aunt, uncle, and cousins? I hope they have got better of their colds, coughs, claps, toothaches, fevers, stranguries, sciaticas, swellings, and sore eyes. What a devil of an apothecary, to take so much blood, give such a vile purge, puke, poultice, plaister, night draught, clister, blister, and why so many grains of calomel, Santa Maria, and such a dose of opium, periclitating party, the whole family of ye, from head to tail, by my great-aunt Dinah's old black velvet mask. I think there was no occasion for it. Now this being a little bald about the chin, by frequently putting off and on, before she was got with child by the coachman, not one of our family would wear it after. To cover the mask afresh was more than the mask was worth, and to wear a mask which was bald, or which could be half seen through, was as bad as having no mask at all. This is the reason, may it please your reverences, that in all our numerous family, for these 4 generations, we count no more than 1 archbishop, a Welch judge, some 3 or 4 aldermen, and a single mountebank. In the 16th century, we boast of no less than a dozen alchemists. Chapter 4. It is with love as with cuckoldom. The suffering party is at least the third, but generally the last in the house who knows anything about the matter. This comes, as all the world knows, from having half a dozen words for one thing. And so long as what in this vessel of the human frame is love may be hatred, in that sentiment half a yard higher end nonsense no, madam, not there, I mean at the part one am now pointing to with my forefinger how can we help ourselves. Of all mortal and immortal men too, if you please, who ever soliloquized upon this mystic subject, my Uncle Toby was the worst fitted to have pushed his researches through such a contention of feelings. And he had infallibly let them all run on, as we do worse matters, to see what they would turn out had not Bridget's pre-notification of them to Susanna, and Susanna's repeated manifestos thereupon to all the world, made it necessary for my Uncle Toby to look into the affair. Chapter 5. Why weavers, gardeners, and gladiators or a man with a pined leg, proceeding from some ailment in the foot should ever have had some tender nymph breaking her heart in secret for them, are points well and duly settled, and accounted for by ancient and modern physiologists. A water drinker, provided he is a professed one, and does it without fraud or coven, is precisely in the same predicament. Not that, at first sight, there is any consequence or show of logic in it, that a rill of cold water dribbling through my inward parts should light up a torch in my jennies. The proposition does not strike one. On the contrary, it seems to run opposite to the natural workings of causes and effects. But it shows the weakness and imbecility of human reason. And in perfect good health with it. The most perfect, madam, that friendship herself could wish me. And drink nothing, nothing but water. Impetuous fluid, the moment thou pressest against the floodgates of the brain, see how they give way. In swims curiosity, beckoning to her damsels to follow they dive into the center of the current. Fancy sits musing upon the bank, and with her eyes following the stream, turns straws and bulrushes into masts and bowsprits and desire. With vest held up to the knee in one hand, snatches at them, as they swim by her with the other. O ye water drinkers! Is it then by this delusive fountain that ye have so often governed and turned this world about like a mill wheel grinding the faces of the impotent bepowdering, their ribs bepeppering their noses, and changing sometimes even the very frame and face of nature? If I was you, quoth Yorick, I would drink more water, Eugenius, and if I was you, Yorick, replied Eugenius, so would I. Which shows they had both read Longinus. For my own part, I am resolved never to read any book but my own, as long as I live. Chapter 6. I wish my Uncle Toby had been a water drinker, for then the thing had been accounted for, that the first moment Widow Wadman saw him, she felt something stirring within her in his favor, something perhaps more than friendship, less than love, something no matter, what no matter, where I would not give a single hair off my mule's tail, and be obliged to pluck it off myself. Indeed the villain has not many to spare, and is not a little vicious into the bargain, to be let by your worships into the secret. But the truth is, my Uncle Toby was not a water drinker. He drank it neither pure nor mixed, or anyhow, or anywhere, except fortuitously upon some advanced posts, where better liquor was not to be had or during the time he was under cure. When the surgeon telling him it would extend the fibers, and bring them sooner into contact, my Uncle Toby drank it for quietness' sake. Now as all the world knows, that no effect in nature can be produced without a cause, and as it is as well known that my Uncle Toby was neither a weaver, a gardener, or a gladiator unless as a captain, you will needs have him one, but then he was only a captain of foot, and besides, the whole is an equivocation. There is nothing left for us to suppose, but that my Uncle Toby's leg, but that will avail us little in the present hypothesis. Unless it had proceeded from some ailment in the foot, whereas his leg was not emaciated from any disorder in his foot, for my Uncle Toby's leg was not emaciated at all. It was a little stiff and awkward, from a total disuse of it, for the 3 years he lay confined at my father's house in town, but it was plump and muscular, and in all other respects as good and promising a leg as the other. I declare, I do not recollect any one opinion or passage of my life, where my understanding was more at a loss to make ends meet, and torture the chapter one had been writing, to the service of the chapter following it, than in the present case. One would think I took a pleasure in running into difficulties of this kind, merely to make fresh experiments of getting out of 'em inconsiderate soul that thou art. What? are not the unavoidable distresses with which, as an author and a man, thou art hemmed in on every side of thee are they, Tristram, not sufficient, but thou must entangle thyself still more. Is it not enough that thou art in debt, and that thou hast 10 cartloads of thy 5th and 6th volumes still unsold, and art almost at thy wits' ends, how to get them off thy hands? To this hour art thou not tormented with the vile asthma that thou gaddest in skating against the wind in Flanders? And is it but 2 months ago that in a fit of laughter, on seeing a cardinal make water like a quirister, with both hands thou breakest a vessel in thy lungs, whereby in 2 hours thou lost as many quarts of blood? And hadst thou lost as much more, did not the faculty tell thee it would have amounted to a gallon? Chapter 18. I think, and please your honour, quoth Trim, the fortifications are quite destroyed and the basin is upon a level with the mole. I think so too, replied my Uncle Toby with a sigh half suppressed, but step into the parlour, Trim, for the stipulation it lies upon the table. It has lain there these 6 weeks, replied the corporal, till this very morning that the old woman kindled the fire with it. Then, said my Uncle Toby, there is no further occasion for our services. The more, and please your honour, the pity, said the corporal, in uttering which he cast his spade into the wheelbarrow, which was beside him, with an air the most expressive of disconsolation that can be imagined, and was heavily turning about to look for his pickaxe, his pioneer's shovel, his pickets, and other little military stores, in order to carry them off the field when a hay-ho. From the sentry box, which being made of thin slit deal, reverberated the sound more sorrowfully to his ear, forbade him. No, said the corporal to himself, I'll do it before his honour rises tomorrow morning. So taking his spade out of the wheelbarrow again, with a little earth in it, as if to level something at the foot of the glacis, but with a real intent to approach nearer to his master, in order to divert him he loosened a sod or 2 paired their edges with his spade, and having given them a gentle blow or 2 with the back of it, he sat himself down close by my Uncle Toby's feet, and began as follows. Chapter 19. It was 1,000 pities though, I believe, and please your honour, I am going to say but a foolish kind of a thing for a soldier. A soldier, cried my Uncle Toby, interrupting the corporal, is no more exempt from saying a foolish thing, Trim, than a man of letters, but not so often, and please your honour, replied the corporal. My Uncle Toby gave a nod. It was 1,000 pities then, said the corporal, casting his eye upon Dunkirk, and the mole, as Servius Sulpicius, in returning out of Asia, when he sailed from Aegina towards Megara, did upon Corinth and Piraeus. It was 1,000 pities, and please your honour, to destroy these works, and 1,000 pities to have let them stood. Thou art right, Trim, in both cases, said my Uncle Toby. This, continued the corporal, is the reason that from the beginning of their demolition to the end I have never once whistled, or sung, or laughed, or cried, or talked of past done deeds, or told your honour one story good or bad. Thou hast many excellencies, Trim, said my Uncle Toby, and I hold it not the least of them, as thou happiness to be a story-teller, that of the number thou hast told me, either to amuse me in my painful hours, or divert me in my grave ones. Thou hast seldom told me a bad one. Because, and please your honour, except one of a king of Bohemia and his 7 castles, they are all true, for they are about myself. I do not like the subject the worse, Trim, said my Uncle Toby on that score, but prithee what is this story? Thou hast excited my curiosity. I'll tell it your honour, quoth the corporal, directly provided, said my Uncle Toby, looking earnestly towards Dunkirk, and the mole again, provided it is not a merry one. To such, Trim, a man should ever bring 1/2 of the entertainment along with him. And the disposition I am in at present would wrong both thee, Trim, and thy story. It is not a merry one by any means, replied the corporal, nor would I have it altogether a grave one. Added my Uncle Toby, it is neither the one nor the other, replied the corporal, but will suit your honour exactly. Then I'll thank thee for it with all my heart, cried my Uncle Toby. So prithee begin it, Trim. The corporal made his reverence, and though it is not so easy a matter as the world imagines, to pull off a lank Montero cap with grace, or a whit less difficult, in my conceptions, when a man is sitting squat upon the ground, to make a bow so teeming with respect as the corporal was wont. Yet by suffering the palm of his right hand, which was towards his master, to slip backwards upon the grass, a little beyond his body, in order to allow it the greater sweep end by an unforced compression, at the same time, of his cap with the thumb and the two forefingers of his left, by which the diameter of the cap became reduced, so that it might be said. Rather to be insensibly squeezed than pulled off with a flatus, the corporal acquitted himself of both in a better manner than the posture of his affairs promised. And having hemmed twice, to find in what key his story would best go, and best suit his master's humor, he exchanged a single look of kindness with him, and set off thus. The story of the King of Bohemia and his 7 castles. There was a certain king of Bohemia. As the corporal was entering the confines of Bohemia, my Uncle Toby obliged him to halt for a single moment. He had set out bareheaded, having, since he pulled off his Montero cap in the latter end of the last chapter, left it lying beside him on the ground. The eye of goodness espieth all things, so that before the corporal had well got through the first 5 words of his story, had my Uncle Toby twice touched his Montero cap with the end of his cane, interrogatively, as much as to say, "Why don't you put it on, Trim?" Trim took it up with the most respectful slowness, and casting a glance of humiliation as he did it, upon the embroidery of the forepart, which being dismally tarnished and frayed moreover in some of the principal leaves and boldest parts of the pattern, he laid it down again between his 2 feet, in order to moralize upon the subject. "'Tis every word of it but too true," cried my Uncle Toby, "that thou art about to observe. Nothing in this world, Trim, is made to last forever. But when tokens, dear Tom, of thy love and remembrance wear out," said Trim, "what shall we say?" "There is no occasion, Trim," quoth my Uncle Toby, "to say anything else, and was a man to puzzle his brains till doomsday, I believe, Trim, it would be impossible." The corporal, perceiving my Uncle Toby was in the right, and that it would be in vain for the wit of man to think of extracting a purer moral from his cap, without further attempting it, he put it on, and passing his hand across his forehead to rub out a pensive wrinkle, which the text and the doctrine between them had engendered, he returned, with the same look and tone of voice, to his story of the King of Bohemia and his 7 castles. The story of the King of Bohemia and his 7 castles continued. There was a certain King of Bohemia, but in whose reign, except his own, I am not able to inform your honor. "I do not desire it of thee, Trim, by any means," cried my Uncle Toby. "It was a little before the time, and please your honor, when giants were beginning to leave off breeding. But in what year of our Lord that was?" "I would not give a halfpenny to know," said my Uncle Toby. "Only, and please your honor, it makes a story look the better in the face. 'Tis thy own, Trim, so ornament it after thy own fashion. And take any date," continued my Uncle Toby, looking pleasantly upon him, "take any date in the whole world thou choosest, and put it to thou art heartily welcome." The corporal bowed, for of every century, and of every year of that century, from the first creation of the world down to Noah's flood, and from Noah's flood to the birth of Abraham, through all the pilgrimages of the patriarchs, to the departure of the Israelites out of Egypt, and throughout all the dynasties, Olympiads, Urbicanditas, and other memorable epochs of the different nations of the world, down to the coming of Christ, and from thence to the very moment in which the corporal was telling his story, had my Uncle Toby subjected this vast empire of time and all its abysses at his feet. But as modesty scarce touches with a finger what liberality offers her, with both hands open the corporal contented himself with the very worst year of the whole bunch, which, to prevent your honors of the majority and minority from tearing the very flesh off your bones in contestation, whether that year is not always the last cast year of the last cast almanac, I tell you plainly it was, but from a different reason than you wot of. It was the year next him, which being the year of our Lord 1712, when the Duke of Ormond was playing the devil in Flanders, the corporal took it, and set out with it afresh on his expedition to Bohemia. The story of the King of Bohemia and his 7 castles continued. In the year of our Lord 1712, there was, and please your honor. To tell thee truly, Trim, quoth my Uncle Toby, any other date would have pleased me much better, not only on account of the sad stain upon our history that year, in marching off our troops, and refusing to cover the siege of Quesnoy, though Fagel was carrying on the works with such incredible vigor, but likewise on the score, Trim, of thy own story. Because if there are in which, from what thou hast dropped, I partly suspect to be the fact, if there are giants in it. There is but one, and please your honor. "'Tis as bad as 20, replied my Uncle Toby, thou shouldst have carried him back some 700 or 800 years out of harm's way, both of critics and other people. And therefore I would advise thee, if ever thou tellest it again. If I live, and please your honor, but once to get through it, I will never tell it again, quoth Trim, either to man, woman, or child poo-poo. Said my Uncle Toby, but with accents of such sweet encouragement did he utter it, that the corporal went on with his story with more alacrity than ever. The story of the King of Bohemia and his 7 castles continued. There was, and please your honor, said the corporal, raising his voice and rubbing the palms of his 2 hands cheerily together as he begun, a certain King of Bohemia. Leave out the date entirely, Trim, quoth my Uncle Toby, leaning forwards and laying his hand gently upon the corporal's shoulder to temper the interruption. Leave it out entirely, Trim. A story passes very well without these niceties, unless one is pretty sure of 'em, said the corporal, shaking his head. Right, answered my Uncle Toby, it is not easy, Trim, for one, bred up as thou and I have been to arms, who seldom looks further forward than to the end of his musket, or backwards beyond his knapsack, to know much about this matter. God bless your honor, said the corporal, won by the manner of my Uncle Toby's reasoning, as much as by the reasoning itself. He has something else to do. If not on action, or a march, or upon duty in his garrison, he has his firelock, and please your honor, to furbish his accoutrements, to take care of his regimentals, to mend himself, to shave and keep clean, so as to appear always like what he is upon the parade. What business, added the corporal triumphantly, has a soldier, and please your honor, to know anything at all of geography? Thou wouldst have said chronology, Trim, said my Uncle Toby, for as for geography, 'tis of absolute use to him. He must be acquainted intimately with every country and its boundaries where his profession carries him. He should know every town and city and village and hamlet, with the canals, the roads, and hollow ways which lead up to them. There is not a river or a rivulet he passes, Trim, but he should be able at first sight to tell thee what is its name, in what mountains it takes its rise, what is its course, how far it is navigable, where fordable, where not. He should know the fertility of every valley, as well as the hind who plows it, and be able to describe, or, if it is required, to give thee an exact map of all the plains and defiles, the forts, the acclivities, the woods and morasses, and by which his army is to march. He should know their produce, their plants, their minerals, their waters, their animals, their seasons, their climates, their heats and cold, their inhabitants, their customs, their language, their policy, and even their religion. Is it else to be conceived, corporal, continued my Uncle Toby, rising up in his sentry box, as he began to warm in this part of his discourse, how Marlborough could have marched his army from the banks of the Meuse to Belberg, from Belberg to Kirpenord. Here the corporal could sit no longer, from Kirpenord, Trim, to Calsaken, from Calsaken to Neudorf, from Neudorf to Landenberg, from Landenberg to Mildenheim, from Mildenheim to Elchingen, from Elchingen to Gingen, from Gingen to Bommertschaffen, from Bommertschaffen to Skellenberg, where he broke in upon the enemy's works, forced his passage over the Danube, crossed the Lech, pushed on his troops into the heart of the empire, marching at the head of them through Fribourg, Hohenwart, and Schoonveld, to the plains of Blenheim and Hittstedt? Great as he was, corporal, he could not have advanced a step, or made one single day's march without the aids of geography. As for chronology, I own, Trim, continued my Uncle Toby, sitting down again coolly in his sentry box, that of all others. It seems a science which the soldier might best spare, was it not for the lights which that science must one day give him, in determining the invention of powder, the furious execution of which, renversing everything like thunder before it, has become a new era to us of military improvements, changing so totally the nature of attacks and defenses both by sea and land, and awakening so much art and skill in doing it, that the world cannot be too exact in ascertaining the precise time of its discovery, or too inquisitive in knowing what great man was the discoverer, and what occasions gave birth to it. I am far from controverting, continued my Uncle Toby, what historians agree in, that in the year of our Lord 1380, under the reign of Wenceslaus, son of Charles the Fourth, a certain priest, whose name was Schwartz, showed the use of powder to the Venetians in their wars against the Genoese. But 'tis certain he was not the first, because if we are to believe Don Pedro, the Bishop of Leon, how came priests and bishops, and please your honor, to trouble their heads so much about gunpowder? God knows, said my Uncle Toby, his providence brings good out of everything, and he avers, in his Chronicle of King Alphonsus, who reduced Toledo, that in the year 1343, which was full 37 years before that time, the secret of powder was well known, and employed with success, both by Moors and Christians, not only in their sea combats, at that period, but in many of their most memorable sieges in Spain and Barbary, and all the world knows. That Friar Bacon had wrote expressly about it, and had generously given the world a receipt to make it by, above 150 years before even Schwartz was born, and that the Chinese, added my Uncle Toby, embarrass us, and all accounts of it, still more, by boasting of the invention some hundreds of years even before him. They are a pack of liars, I believe, cried Trim. They are somehow or other deceived, said my Uncle Toby, in this matter, as is plain to me from the present miserable state of military architecture amongst them, which consists of nothing more than a facade with a brick wall without flank sand for what they gave us as a bastion at each angle of it. 'Tis so barbarously constructed that it looks for all the world like one of my 7 castles, and please your honor, quoth Trim. My Uncle Toby, though in the utmost distress for a comparison, most courteously refused Trim's offer till Trim telling him he had half a dozen more in Bohemia, which he knew not how to get off his hands. My Uncle Toby was so touched with the pleasantry of heart of the corporal that he discontinued his dissertation upon gunpowder, and begged the corporal forthwith to go on with his story of the King of Bohemia and his 7 castles. The story of the King of Bohemia and his 7 castles continued. This unfortunate King of Bohemia, said Trim, was he unfortunate then? Cried my Uncle Toby, for he had been so wrapped up in his dissertation upon gunpowder and other military affairs that though he had desired the corporal to go on, yet the many interruptions he had given dwelt not so strong upon his fancy as to account for the epithet was he unfortunate, then Trim. Said my Uncle Toby, pathetically the corporal, wishing first the word and all its synonyms at the devil, forthwith began to run back in his mind the principal events in the King of Bohemia's story, from every one of which, it appearing that he was the most fortunate man that ever existed in the world, it put the corporal to a stand. For not caring to retract his epithet and less to explain it, and least of all, to twist his tale, like men of lore, to serve a system he looked up in my Uncle Toby's face for assistance, but seeing it was the very thing my Uncle Toby sat in expectation of himself after a hum and a haw, he went on. The King of Bohemia, and please your honor, replied the corporal, was unfortunate, as thus that taking great pleasure and delight in navigation, and all sort of sea affairs and their happening throughout the whole kingdom of Bohemia, to be no seaport town whatever. How the Duce should there Trim? Cried my Uncle Toby, for Bohemia being totally inland, it could have happened no otherwise it might, said Trim, if it had pleased God. My Uncle Toby never spoke of the being and natural attributes of God, but with diffidence and hesitation. I believe not, replied my Uncle Toby, after some pause, for being inland, as I said, and having Silesia and Moravia to the east, Lusatia and Upper Saxony to the north, Franconia to the west, Bavaria to the south. Bohemia could not have been propelled to the sea without ceasing to be Bohemia, nor could the sea, on the other hand, have come up to Bohemia without overflowing a great part of Germany and destroying millions of unfortunate inhabitants who could make no defense against it. Scandalous, cried Trim, which would bespeak, added my Uncle Toby, mildly, such a want of compassion in him who is the father of it that, I think, Trim the thing could have happened no way. The corporal made the bow of unfeigned conviction, and went on. Now the King of Bohemia with his queen and courtiers happening one fine summer's evening to walk out, there the word happening is right, Trim, cried my Uncle Toby, for the King of Bohemia and his queen might have walked out or let it alone. 'Twas a matter of contingency, which might happen or not, just as chance ordered it. King William was of an opinion, and please your honor, quoth Trim, that everything was predestined for us in this world, insomuch that he would often say to his soldiers that every ball had its billet. He was a great man, said my Uncle Toby, and I believe, continued Trim, to this day, that the shot which disabled me at the Battle of Landen was pointed at my knee for no other purpose, but to take me out of his service and place me in your honors, where I should be taken so much better care of in my old age. It shall never, Trim, be construed otherwise, said my Uncle Toby. The heart, both of the master and the man, were alike subject to sudden overflowings. A short silence ensued. "Besides," said the corporal, resuming the discourse but in a gayer accent if it had not been for that single shot, "I had never, and please your honor, been in love." "So thou wast once in love, Trim," said my Uncle Toby, smiling. "Souse," replied the corporal over head and ears, "and please your honor, prithee when? Where? And how came it to pass? I never heard one word of it before," quoth my Uncle Toby. "I dare say," answered Trim, "that every drummer and sergeant's son in the regiment knew of it. It's high time I should," said my Uncle Toby. "Your honor remembers with concern," said the corporal, "the total rout and confusion of our camp and army at the affair of Landen. Every one was left to shift for himself. And if it had not been for the regiments of Windham, Lumley, and Galway, which covered the retreat over the bridge of Nearspeakin, the king himself could scarce have gained it. He was pressed hard, as your honor knows, on every side of him." "Gallant mortal," cried my Uncle Toby, caught up with enthusiasm this moment. "Now that all is lost, I see him galloping across me, corporal, to the left, to bring up the remains of the English horse along with him to support the right, and tear the laurel from Luxembourg's brows. If yet 'tis possible, I see him with the knot of his scarf just shot off, infusing fresh spirits into poor Galway's regiment, riding along the line, then wheeling about, and charging Conti at the head of it. Brave, brave, by heaven!" cried my Uncle Toby. "He deserves a crown as richly as a thief a halter," shouted Trim. My Uncle Toby knew the corporal's loyalty. Otherwise the comparison was not at all to his mind. It did not altogether strike the corporal's fancy when he had made it, but it could not be recalled, so he had nothing to do but proceed. As the number of wounded was prodigious, and no one had time to think of anything but his own safety, though Talmash, said my Uncle Toby, brought off the foot with great prudence, "but I was left upon the field," said the corporal. "Thou wast so, poor fellow," replied my Uncle Toby. "So that it was noon the next day," continued the corporal, "before I was exchanged and put into a cart with 13 or 14 more, in order to be conveyed to our hospital. There is no part of the body, and please your honor, where a wound occasions more intolerable anguish than upon the knee." "Except the groin," said my Uncle Toby. "And please your honor," replied the corporal, "the knee, in my opinion, must certainly be the most acute, there being so many tendons and what d'ye call 'ems all about it." "It is for that reason," quoth my Uncle Toby, "that the groin is infinitely more sensible, there being not only as many tendons and what d'ye call 'ems, for I know their names as little as thou dost about it, but moreover." Mrs. Wadman, who had been all the time in her arbor instantly, stopped her breath, unpinned her mob at the chin, and stood up upon one leg. The dispute was maintained with amicable and equal force betwixt my Uncle Toby and Trim for some time, till Trim at length, recollecting that he had often cried at his master's sufferings, but never shed a tear at his own, was for giving up the point, which my Uncle Toby would not allow. "'Tis a proof of nothing, Trim," said he, "but the generosity of thy temper. So that whether the pain of a wound in the groin, ceteris paribus, is greater than the pain of a wound in the knee, or whether the pain of a wound in the knee is not greater than the pain of a wound in the groin, are points which to this day remain unsettled." Chapter 20. "The anguish of my knee," continued the corporal, "was excessive in itself, and the uneasiness of the cart, with the roughness of the roads, which were terribly cut up, making bad still worse every step, was death to me. So that with the loss of blood, and the want of care taking of me, and a fever I felt coming on besides, poor soul," said my Uncle Toby, "altogether, and please your honor, was more than I could sustain. I was telling my sufferings to a young woman at a peasant's house, where our cart, which was the last of the line, had halted. They had helped me in, and the young woman had taken a cordial out of her pocket and dropped it upon some sugar, and seeing it had cheered me, she had given it me a second and a third time. So I was telling her, and please your honor, the anguish I was in, and was saying it was so intolerable to me that I had much rather lie down upon the bed, turning my face towards one which was in the corner of the room, and die, than go on, when, upon her attempting to lead me to it, I fainted away in her arms. She was a good soul, as your honor," said the corporal, wiping his eyes, "will hear. I thought love had been a joyous thing," quoth my Uncle Toby. "'Tis the most serious thing, and please your honor, sometimes, that is in the world." By the persuasion of the young woman, continued the corporal, the cart with the wounded men set off without me. She had assured them I should expire immediately if I was put into the cart. So when I came to myself, I found myself in a still quiet cottage, with no one but the young woman and the peasant and his wife. I was laid across the bed in the corner of the room, with my wounded leg upon a chair, and the young woman beside me, holding the corner of her handkerchief dipped in vinegar to my nose with one hand and rubbing my temples with the other. I took her at first for the daughter of the peasant, for it was no inn, so had offered her a little purse with 18 florins, which my poor brother Tom, here Trim whipped his eyes, had sent me as a token, by a recruit, just before he set out for Lisbon. I never told your honor that piteous story, yet here Trim wiped his eyes a third time. The young woman called the old man and his wife into the room to show them the money, in order to gain me credit for a bed and what little necessaries I should want, till I should be in a condition to be got to the hospital come then. Said she, tying up the little purse, I'll be your banker, but as that office alone will not keep me employed, I'll be your nurse too. I thought by her manner of speaking this, as well as by her dress, which I then began to consider more attentively, that the young woman could not be the daughter of the peasant. She was in black down to her toes, with her hair concealed under a cambric border, laid close to her forehead. She was one of those kind of nuns, and please your honor, of which your honor knows there are a good many in Flanders, which they let go loose by thy description, Trim. Said my Uncle Toby, I dare say she was a young beguine, of which there are none to be found anywhere, but in the Spanish Netherlands except at Amsterdam they differ from nuns in this, that they can quit their cloister if they choose to marry. They visit and take care of the sick by profession. I had rather, for my own part, they did it out of good nature. She often told me, quoth Trim, she did it for the love of Christ. I did not like it. I believe, Trim, we are both wrong, said my Uncle Toby. Will ask Mr. Yorick about it tonight at my brother Shandy's, so put me in mind, added my Uncle Toby. The young beguine, continued the corporal, had scarce given herself time to tell me she would be my nurse, when she hastily turned about to begin the office of one, and prepare something for me, and in a short time, though I thought it a long one, she came back with flannels, and having fomented my knee soundly for a couple of hours, and made me a thin basin of gruel for my supper, she wished me rest, and promised to be with me early in the morning. She wished me, and please your honor, what was not to be had. My fever ran very high that night, her figure made sad disturbance within me. I was every moment cutting the world in two to give her half of it, and every moment was I crying that I had nothing but a knapsack and 18 florins to share with her the whole night long. Was the fair beguine, like an angel, close by my bedside, holding back the curtain and offering me cordials, and I was only awakened from my dream by her coming there at the hour promised, and giving them in reality. In truth, she was scarce ever from me, and so accustomed was I to receive life from her hands, that my heart sickened, and I lost color when she left the room. And yet, continued the corporal, making one of the strangest reflections upon it in the world, it was not love, for during the 3 weeks she was almost constantly with me, fomenting my knee with her hand, night and day. I can honestly say, and please your honor, that once. That was very odd, Trim, quoth my Uncle Toby. I think so too, said Mrs. Wadman. It never did, said the corporal. Chapter 21. But 'tis no marvel, continued the corporal, seeing my Uncle Toby musing upon it, for love, and please your honor, is exactly like war in this, that a soldier, though he has escaped 3 weeks complete Saturday night, may nevertheless be shot through his heart on Sunday morning. It happened so here, and please your honor, with this difference only, that it was on Sunday in the afternoon, when I fell in love all at once with a cicerara. It burst upon me, and please your honor, like a bomb, scarce giving me time to say, God bless me. I thought, Trim, said my Uncle Toby, a man never fell in love so very suddenly. Yes, and please your honor, if he is in the way of it, replied Trim. I prithee, quoth my Uncle Toby, inform me how this matter happened. With all pleasure, said the corporal, making a bow. Chapter 28. In love, said the corporal, your honor was very well the day before yesterday, when I was telling your honor the story of the King of Bohemia. Said my Uncle Toby, musing a long time, what became of that story, Trim? We lost it, and please your honor, somehow betwixt us, but your honor was as free from love then, as I am. 'Twas just whilst thou wentst off with the wheelbarrow with Mrs. Wadman, quoth my Uncle Toby, she has left a ball here, added my Uncle Toby, pointing to his breast. She can no more, and please your honor, stand a siege, then she can flyke ride the corporal. But as we are neighbors, Trim, the best way I think is to let her know it civilly first, quoth my Uncle Toby. Now if I might presume, said the corporal, to differ from your honor. Why else do I talk to thee, Trim? Said my Uncle Toby mildly. Then I would begin, and please your honor, with making a good thundering attack upon her, in return and telling her civilly afterwards, for if she knows anything of your honor's being in love, beforehand LD help her. She knows no more at present of it, Trim, said my Uncle Toby, than the child unborn. Precious souls! Mrs. Wadman had told it with all its circumstances to Mrs. Bridget 24 hours before, and was at that very moment sitting in council with her, touching some slight misgivings with regard to the issue of the affairs, which the devil, who never lies dead in a ditch, had put into her head before he would allow half time to get quietly through her tea diem. I am terribly afraid, said Widow Wadman, in case I should marry him, Bridget, that the poor captain will not enjoy his health, with the monstrous wound upon his groin. It may not, madam, be so very large, replied Bridget, as you think and I believe. Besides, added she, that tea's dried up. I could like to know merely for his sake, said Mrs. Wadman. We'll know the long and the broad of it in 10 days, answered Mrs. Bridget, for whilst the captain is paying his addresses to you, I'm confident Mr. Trim will be for making love to me, and I'll let him as much as he will, added Bridget, to get it all out of him. The measures were taken at once end my Uncle Toby, and the corporal went on with theirs. Now, quoth the corporal, setting his left hand akimbo, and giving such a flourish with his right, as just promised success, and no more, if your honor will give me leave to lay down the plan of this attack. Thou wilt please me by it, Trim, said my Uncle Toby, exceedingly, and as I foresee thou must act in it as my aide de camp. Here's a crown, corporal, to begin with, to steep thy commission. Then, and please your honor, said the corporal, making a bow first for his commission, we will begin with getting your honor's laced clothes out of the great campaign trunk, to be well aired, and have the blue and gold taken up at the sleeves end. I'll put your white ramally wig fresh into pipes and send for a tailor, to have your honor's thin scarlet breeches turned. I had better take the red plush ones, quoth my Uncle Toby. They will be too clumsy, said the corporal. Chapter 29. Thou wilt get a brush and a little chalk to my sword, twill be only in your honor's way, replied Trim. Chapter 30. But your honor's 2 razors shall be new set, and I will get my Montero cap furbished up, and put on poor Lieutenant Lefever's regimental coat, which your honor gave me to wear for his sake, and, as soon as your honor is clean shaved and has got your clean shirt on, with your blue and gold, or your fine scarlet, sometimes one and sometimes t'other end, everything is ready for the attack. We'll march up boldly, as if 'twas to the face of a bastion. And whilst your honor engages Mrs. Wadman in the parlor, to the right I'll attack Mrs. Bridget in the kitchen, to the left, and having seized the pass, I'll answer for it, said the corporal, snapping his fingers over his head, that the day is our own. I wish I may but manage it right, said my Uncle Toby, but I declare, corporal, I had rather march up to the very edge of a trench. A woman is quite a different thing, said the corporal. I suppose so, quoth my Uncle Toby. Chapter 31. If anything in this world, which my father said, could have provoked my Uncle Toby during the time he was in love, it was the perverse use my father was always making of an expression of Hilarion the Hermit, who, in speaking of his abstinence, his watchings, flagellations, and other instrumental parts of his religion, would say, though with more facetiousness than became an hermit, that they were the means he used to make his ass, meaning his body, leave off kicking. It pleased my father well. It was not only a laconic way of expressing, but of libeling, at the same time, the desires and appetites of the lower part of us. So that for many years of my father's life, 'twas his constant mode of expression. He never used the word passions once, but ass always instead of them, so that he might be said truly to have been upon the bones or the back of his own ass, or else of some other man's, during all that time. I must here observe to you the difference betwixt my father's ass and my hobby horse, in order to keep characters as separate as may be, in our fancies as we go along. For my hobby horse, if you recollect a little, is no way a vicious beast. He has scarce one hair or lineament of the ass about him. 'Tis the sporting little filly folly which carries you out for the present hour a maggot, a butterfly, a picture, a fiddlestick in Uncle Toby's sejour in anything. which a man makes a shift to get astride on, to canter it away from the cares and solicitudes of life tease as useful a beast, as is in the whole creation, nor do I really see how the world would do without it. But for my father's asso, mount him, mount him, mount him, that's 3 times, is it not? Mount him not. 'Tis a beast concupiscent and foul befoul the man, who does not hinder him from kicking. Chapter 32. Well, dear brother Toby, said my father, upon his first seeing him, after he fell in love, and how goes it with your essay? Now my Uncle Toby, thinking more of the part where he had had the blister, than of Hilarian's metaphor and our preconceptions having, you know, as great a power over the sounds of words as the shapes of things, he had imagined that my father, who was not very ceremonious in his choice of words, had inquired after the part by its proper name. So notwithstanding my mother, Dr. Slop, and Mr. Yorick were sitting in the parlor, he thought it rather civil to conform to the term my father had made use of than not. When a man is hemmed in by 2 indecorums, and must commit one of 'em, I always observe, let him choose which he will, the world will blame him, so I should not be astonished if it blames my Uncle Toby. My A.E., quoth my Uncle Toby, is much better brother Shandy. My father had formed great expectations from his essay in this onset, and would have brought him on again, but Dr. Slop setting up an intemperate laugh and my mother crying out, "El bless us." It drove my father's essay off the field, and the laugh, then becoming general, there was no bringing him back to the charge, for some time. And so the discourse went on without him. Everybody, said my mother, says you are in love, brother Toby, and we hope it is true. I am as much in love, sister, I believe, replied my Uncle Toby, as any man usually is. Humph, said my father. And when did you know it? Quoth my mother. When the blister broke, replied my Uncle Toby. My Uncle Toby's reply put my father into good temper, so he charged foot. Chapter 33. As the ancients agree, brother Toby, said my father, that there are 2 different and distinct kinds of love, according to the different parts which are affected by it, the brain or liver. I think, when a man is in love, it behoves him a little to consider which of the 2 he has fallen into. What signifies it, brother Shandy, replied my Uncle Toby, which of the 2 it is, provided it will but make a man marry and love his wife, and get a few children. A few children, cried my father, rising out of his chair and looking full in my mother's face, as he forced his way betwixt hers and Dr. Slop's. A few children, cried my father, repeating my Uncle Toby's words as he walked to and fro. Not, my dear brother Toby, cried my father, recovering himself all at once, and coming close up to the back of my Uncle Toby's chair, not that I should be sorry hadst thou a score. On the contrary, I should rejoice and be as kind, Toby, to every one of them as a father. My Uncle Toby stole his hand unperceived behind his chair, to give my father's a squeeze. Nay, moreover, continued he, keeping hold of my Uncle Toby's hand, so much dost thou possess, my dear Toby, of the milk of human nature, and so little of its asperities. 'Tis piteous, the world is not peopled by creatures which resemble thee. And was I an Asiatic monarch, added my father, heating himself with his new project, I would oblige thee, provided it would not impair thy strength or dry up thy radical moisture too fast or weaken thy memory or fancy, brother Toby, which these gymnics inordinately taken are apt to do. Else, dear Toby, I would procure thee the most beautiful women in my empire, and I would oblige thee, Nolans, Volans, to beget for me 1 subject every month. As my father pronounced the last word of the sentence, my mother took a pinch of snuff. Now I would not, quoth my Uncle Toby, get a child, Nolans, Volans, that is, whether I would or no, to please the greatest prince upon earth. And 'twould be cruel in me, brother Toby, to compel thee, said my father, but 'tis a case put to show thee that it is not thy begetting a child in case thou shouldst be able, but the system of love and marriage thou goest upon, which I would set thee right in. There is at least, said Yorick, a great deal of reason and plain sense in Captain Shandy's opinion of love, and 'tis amongst the ill-spent hours of my life, which I have to answer for, that I have read so many flourishing poets and rhetoricians in my time, from whom I never could extract so much. I wish, Yorick, said my father, you had read Plato, for there you would have learnt that there are 2 loves. I know there were 2 religions, replied Yorick, amongst the ancients, one for the vulgar, and another for the learned. But I think one love might have served both of them very well. It could not, replied my father, and for the same reasons. For of these loves, according to Ficinus's comment upon Valesius, the one is rational. The other is natural. The first, ancient without mother where Venus had nothing to do. The second, begotten of Jupiter and Dione. Pray, brother, quoth my Uncle Toby, what has a man who believes in God to do with this? My father could not stop to answer, for fear of breaking the thread of his discourse. This latter, continued he, partakes wholly of the nature of Venus. The first, which is the golden chain let down from heaven, excites to love heroic, which comprehends in it, and excites to the desire of philosophy and truth. The second excites to desire, simply. I think the procreation of children as beneficial to the world, said Yorick, as the finding out of the longitude. To be sure, said my mother, love keeps peace in the world. In the house, my dear, I own. It replenishes the earth, said my mother. But it keeps heaven empty, my dear, replied my father. 'Tis virginity, cried Slop triumphantly, which fills paradise. Well pushed, nun, quoth my father. Chapter 10. My mother had gone with her left arm twisted in my father's right, till they had got to the fatal angle of the old garden wall, where Dr. Slop was overthrown by Obadiah on the coach horse. As this was directly opposite to the front of Mrs. Wadman's house, when my father came to it, he gave a look across. And seeing my Uncle Toby and the corporal within 10 paces of the door, he turned about. Let us just stop a moment, quoth my father, and see with what ceremonies my brother Toby and his man Trim make their first entry. It will not detain us, added my father, a single minute. No matter, if it be 10 minutes, quoth my mother. It will not detain us half one, said my father. The corporal was just then setting in with the story of his brother Tom and the Jew's widow. The story went on and on. It had episodes in it. It came back, and went on and on again. There was no end of it. The reader found it very long. Gee help my father. He pished 50 times at every new attitude, and gave the corporal's stick, with all its flourishings and dangling, to as many devils as chose to accept of them. When issues of events like these my father is waiting for, are hanging in the scales of fate, the mind has the advantage of changing the principle of expectation 3 times, without which it would not have power to see it out. Curiosity governs the first moment, and the second moment is all economy to justify the expense of the first and for the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth moments, and so on to the day of judgment. 'Tis a point of honor. I need not be told that the ethic writers have assigned this all to patience. But that virtue, methinks, has extent of dominion sufficient of her own, and enough to do in it, without invading the few dismantled castles which honor has left him upon the earth. My father stood it out as well as he could with these 3 auxiliaries to the end of Trim's story, and from thence to the end of my Uncle Toby, Panegyric upon arms, in the chapter following it. When seeing that instead of marching up to Mrs. Wadman's door, they both faced about and marched down the avenue diametrically opposite to his expectation, he broke out at once, with that little subacid soreness of humor which, in certain situations, distinguished his character from that of all other men. Chapter 11. Now what can their 2 noddles be about? Cried my father and see. I dare say, said my mother, they are making fortifications. Not on Mrs. Wadman's premises, cried my father, stepping back. I suppose not, quoth my mother. I wish, said my father, raising his voice, the whole science of fortification at the devil, with all its trumpery of saps, mines, blinds, gabions, fosbrays, and cuvets. They are foolish things, said my mother. Now she had a way, which, by the by, I would this moment give away my purple jerkin, and my yellow slippers into the bargain, if some of your reverences would imitate, and that was, never to refuse her assent and consent to any proposition my father laid before her, merely because she did not understand it, or had no ideas of the principal word or term of art, upon which the tenet or proposition rolled. She contented herself with doing all that her godfathers and godmothers promised for her, but no more, and so would go on using a hard word 20 years together, and replying to it too, if it was a verb, in all its moods and tenses, without giving herself any trouble to inquire about it. This was an eternal source of misery to my father, and broke the neck, at the first setting out, of more good dialogues between them, than could have done the most petulant contradiction. The few which survived were the better for the cuvets. "They are foolish things," said my mother. "Particularly the cuvets," replied my father. "'Tis enough he tasted the sweet of triumph and went on. "Not that they are, properly speaking, Mrs. Wadman's premises," said my father, partly correcting himself because she is but tenant for life. "That makes a great difference," said my mother. "In a fool's head," replied my father. "Unless she should happen to have a child," said my mother. "But she must persuade my brother Toby first to get her one." "To be sure, Mr. Shandy," quoth my mother. "Though if it comes to persuasion," said my father, "Lord have mercy upon them." "Amen," said my mother, piano. "Amen," cried my father, fortissime. "Amen," said my mother again, but with such a sighing cadence of personal pity at the end of it, as discomfited every fiber about my father. He instantly took out his almanac. But before he could untie it, Yorick's congregation coming out of church became a full answer to one half of his business, with it and my mother telling him it was a sacrament day left him as little in doubt. As to the other part, he put his almanac into his pocket. The first Lord of the Treasury, thinking of ways and means, could not have returned home with a more embarrassed look. Chapter 27. My Uncle Toby's map is carried down into the kitchen. Chapter 28. "And here is the mise, and this is the samber," said the corporal, pointing with his right hand extended a little towards the map and his left upon Mrs. Bridget's shoulder, but not the shoulder next him. "And this," said he, "is the town of Namur, and this the citadel, and there lay the French, and here lay his honor and myself. And in this cursed trench, Mrs. Bridget," quoth the corporal, taking her by the hand, "did he receive the wound which crushed him so miserably here." In pronouncing which, he slightly pressed the back of her hand towards the part he felt for and let it fall. "We thought, Mr. Trim, it had been more in the middle," said Mrs. Bridget. "That would have undone us for ever," said the corporal. "And left my poor mistress undone too," said Bridget. The corporal made no reply to the repartee, but by giving Mrs. Bridget a kiss. "Come, come," said Bridget, holding the palm of her left hand parallel to the plane of the horizon, and sliding the fingers of the other over it, in a way which could not have been done, had there been the least wart or protuberances, every syllable of it false, cried the corporal, before she had half finished the sentence. "I know it to be fact," said Bridget, "from credible witnesses." "Upon my honor," said the corporal, laying his hand upon his heart and blushing, as he spoke, with honest resentment. "'Tis a story, Mrs. Bridget, as false as hell not," said Bridget, interrupting him, "that either I or my mistress care a halfpenny about it, whether 'tis so or no, only that when one is married, one would choose to have such a thing by one at least." It was somewhat unfortunate for Mrs. Bridget that she had begun the attack with her manual exercise, for the corporal instantly. Chapter 29. It was like the momentary contest in the moist eyelids of an April morning, whether Bridget should laugh or cry. She snatched up a rolling pintoise 10-1, she had laughed. She laid it down, she cried, and had one single tear of 'em but tasted of bitterness. Full sorrowful would the corporal's heart have been that he had used the argument. But the corporal understood the sex, a court major to a terce at least, better than my Uncle Toby, and accordingly he assailed Mrs. Bridget after this manner. "I know, Mrs. Bridget," said the corporal, giving her a most respectful kiss, "that thou art good and modest by nature, and art withal so generous a girl in thyself, that, if I know thee rightly, thou wouldst not wound an insect, much less the honor of so gallant and worthy a soul as my master, wast thou sure to be made a countess of, but thou hast been set on and deluded, dear Bridget, as is often a woman's case, to please others more than themselves." Bridget's eyes poured down at the sensations, the corporal excited. Tell me, then, my dear Bridget," continued the corporal, taking hold of her hand, which hung down dead by her side, and giving a second kiss. "Whose suspicion has misled thee?" Bridget sobbed a sob or two, then opened her eyes. The corporal wiped him with the bottom of her apron. She then opened her heart and told him all. Chapter 30. My Uncle Toby and the corporal had gone on separately with their operations the greatest part of the campaign, and as effectually cut off from all communication of what either the one or the other had been doing, as if they had been separated from each other by the mise or the samber. My Uncle Toby, on his side, had presented himself every afternoon in his red and silver, and blue and gold alternately, and sustained an infinity of attacks in them, without knowing them to be attacks, and, so had nothing to communicate. The corporal, on his side, in taking Bridget, by it had gained considerable advantages and, consequently, had much to communicate, but what were the advantages as well as what was the manner by which he had seized them, required so nice an historian, that the corporal durst not venture upon it. And as sensible as he was of glory, would rather have been contented to have gone bareheaded and without laurels for ever, than torture his master's modesty for a single moment. Best of honest and gallant servants, but I have apostrophized thee, Trim, once before, and could I apotheosize thee also, that is to say, with good company, I would do it without ceremony in the very next page. Chapter 31. Now my Uncle Toby had one evening laid down his pipe upon the table, and was counting over to himself upon his finger ends, beginning at his thumb, all Mrs. Wadman's perfections one by one, and happening 2 or 3 times together, either by omitting some or counting others twice over, to puzzle himself sadly before he could get beyond his middle finger. Prithee, Trim, said he, taking up his pipe again, bring me a pen and ink. Trim brought paper also. Take a full sheet, Trim, said my Uncle Toby, making a sign with his pipe at the same time to take a chair and sit down close by him at the table. The corporal obeyed, placed the paper directly before him, took a pen, and dipped it in the ink. She has 1,000 virtues, Trim, said my Uncle Toby. Am I to set them down, and please your honor, quoth the corporal. But they must be taken in their ranks, replied my Uncle Toby. For of them all, Trim, that which wins me most, and which is a security for all the rest, is the compassionate turn and singular humanity of her character. I protest, added my Uncle Toby, looking up, as he protested it, towards the top of the ceiling, that was I her brother, Trim, 1,000-fold, she could not make more constant or more tender inquiries after my sufferings, though now no more. The corporal made no reply to my Uncle Toby's protestation, but by a short cough he dipped the pen a second time into the inkhorn, and my Uncle Toby, pointing with the end of his pipe as close to the top of the sheet at the left-hand corner of it as he could get it, the corporal wrote down the word humanity, thus. Prithee, corporal, said my Uncle Toby, as soon as Trim had done it, how often does Mrs. Bridget inquire after the wound on the cap of thy knee, which thou receivedst at the battle of Landen? She never, and please your honor, inquires after it at all. That, corporal, said my Uncle Toby, with all the triumph the goodness of his nature would permit, that shows the difference in the character of the mistress and maid, had the fortune of war allotted the same mischance to me. Mrs. Wadman would have inquired into every circumstance relating to it 100 times she would have inquired. And please your honor, 10 times as often about your honor's groin. The pain, Trim, is equally excruciating, and compassion has as much to do with the one as the other. God bless your honor, cried the corporal, what has a woman's compassion to do with a wound upon the cap of a man's knee? Had your honor been shot into 10,000 splinters at the affair of Landen, Mrs. Wadman would have troubled her head as little about it as Bridget, because, added the corporal, lowering his voice and speaking very distinctly as he assigned his reason, the knee is such a distance from the main body, whereas the groin, your honor knows, is upon the very curtain of the place. My Uncle Toby gave a long whistle, but in a note which could scarce be heard across the table. The corporal had advanced too far to retire. In 3 words, he told the rest. My Uncle Toby laid down his pipe as gently upon the fender, as if it had been spun from the unravelings of a spider's web. Let us go to my brother Shandy's, said he. Chapter 32. There will be just time, whilst my Uncle Toby and Trim are walking to my father's, to inform you that Mrs. Wadman had, some moons before this, made a confidant of my mother, and that Mrs. Bridget, who had the burden of her own, as well as her mistress's secret to carry, had got happily delivered of both to Susanna behind the garden wall. As for my mother, she saw nothing at all in it, to make the least bustle about, but Susanna was sufficient by herself for all the ends and purposes you could possibly have in exporting a family secret. For she instantly imparted it by signs to Jonathan, and Jonathan by tokens to the cook, as she was basting a loin of mutton. The cook sold it with some kitchen fat to the postilion for a groat, who trucked it with the dairy maid for something of about the same value, and though whispered in the hayloft, Fame caught the notes with her brazen trumpet, and sounded them upon the housetop. In a word, not an old woman in the village or 5 miles round, who did not understand the difficulties of my Uncle Toby's siege. And what were the secret articles which had delayed the surrender? My father, whose way was to force every event in nature into an hypothesis, by which means never man crucified truth at the rate he did had, but just heard of the report as my Uncle Toby set out. And catching fire suddenly at the trespass done his brother by it, was demonstrating to Yorick, notwithstanding my mother was sitting by not only, that the devil was in women, and that the whole of the affair was lust, but that every evil and disorder in the world, of what kind or nature soever, from the first fall of Adam down to my Uncle Toby's, inclusive, was owing one way or other to the same unruly appetite. Yorick was just bringing my father's hypothesis to some temper, when my Uncle Toby entering the room with marks of infinite benevolence and forgiveness in his looks, my father's eloquence rekindled against the passion, and as he was not very nice in the choice of his words when he was wroth as soon as my Uncle Toby was seated by the fire, and had filled his pipe, my father broke out in this manner. Chapter 33. That provision should be made for continuing the race of so great, so exalted and godlike a being as man. I am far from denying, but philosophy speaks freely of everything. And therefore I still think and do maintain it to be a pity, that it should be done by means of a passion which bends down the faculties, and turns all the wisdom, contemplations, and operations of the soul backwards. A passion, my dear, continued my father, addressing himself to my mother, which couples and equals wise men with fools, and makes us come out of our caverns and hiding places more like satyrs and four-footed beasts than men. I know it will be said, continued my father, availing himself of the prolepsis, that in itself, and simply taken like hunger, or thirst, or sleep-tease, an affair neither good or bad or shameful or otherwise. Why then did the delicacy of Diogenes and Plato so recalcitrate against it? And wherefore, when we go about to make and plant a man, do we put out the candle? And for what reason is it, that all the parts thereof, the congredients, the preparations, the instruments, and whatever serves thereto, are so held as to be conveyed to a cleanly mind by no language, translation, or periphrasis whatever? The act of killing and destroying a man, continued my father, raising his voice and turning to my Uncle Toby, you see, is glorious, and the weapons by which we do it are honorable. We march with them upon our shoulders, we strut with them, by our sides we gild them, we carve them, we inlay them, we enrich them, nay, if it be but a scoundrel cannon, we cast an ornament upon the breech of it. My Uncle Toby laid down his pipe to intercede for a better epithet, and Yorick was rising up to batter the whole hypothesis to pieces, when Obadiah broke into the middle of the room with a complaint, which cried out for an immediate hearing. The case was this. My father, whether by ancient custom of the manor, or as impropriator of the great tithes, was obliged to keep a bull for the service of the parish, and Obadiah had led his cow upon a pop visit to him one day or other the preceding summer. I say, one day or other because, as chance would have it, it was the day on which he was married to my father's housemaid, so one was a reckoning to the other. Therefore when Obadiah's wife was brought to bed, Obadiah thanked God. Now, said Obadiah, I shall have a calf. So Obadiah went daily to visit his cow. She'll calve on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday at the farthest. The cow did not calve, no, she'll not calve, till next week. The cow put it off terribly till at the end of the 6th week Obadiah's suspicions, like a good man, fell upon the bull. Now the parish being very large, my father's bull, to speak the truth of him, was no way equal to the department. He had, however, got himself, somehow or other, thrust into employment, and, as he went through the business with a grave face, my father had a high opinion of him. Most of the townsmen, and please your worship, quoth Obadiah, believe that 'tis all the bull's fault. But may not a cow be barren? Replied my father, turning to Dr. Slop. It never happens, said Dr. Slop, but the man's wife may have come before her time, naturally enough. Prithee, has the child hair upon his head? Added Dr. Slop. It is as hairy as I am, said Obadiah. Obadiah had not been shaved for 3 weeks. You, cried my father, beginning the sentence with an exclamatory whistle. And so, brother Toby, this poor bull of mine, who is as good a bull as ever possessed, and might have done for Europa herself in purer times had he but 2 legs less, might have been driven into Doctors' Commons and lost his character, which to a town bull, brother Toby, is the very same thing as his life. LD, said my mother, what is all this story about? "A cock and a bull," said Yorick, "and one of the best of its kind I ever heard." Decorative text. The Temple Press, Letchworth, England. Errors and inconsistencies. Inconsistent capitalization of Christian or Christian is unchanged. Intentional anomalies. Book 4, Chapter 25. No doubt, sir, there is a whole chapter wanting here. The text skips 10 pages, from 146 to 156 in this edition, with a corresponding skip in signature numbers, and one chapter in this manner, please but your own fancy in it. Was ever anything I leave this void space? Book 9. Chapter 18, Chapter 18. Typographical errors, corrected by transcriber. This amiable turn of mind, with what good intention and resolution you may, and a tolerable tune, I thought it was a dwarf in more articles than one. Earth no such folks. The sun in its meridian for doing it to Lord ***. Towards the top of the ceiling, the word occurs elsewhere with I. Unchanged forms. All but a quarter of a century had passed. If thou art not too busy with Candid, some editions have 2 consecutive black pages, positioned immediately after the first, alas, poor Yorick. Footnote 1.3. Pentagraph, an instrument to copy. Between the scarp and counterscarp fee farms, knights fees pounds of verjupois griping them hard together with one hand, may he be cursed in his reins ad excitandum, focum, to stir up the fire. Trim took his off the ground, and many a look of mutual congratulation in the corner of an old campaigning trunk. The one, of Aetius, from Tartary to Terra del Fuoco. Hyphens and spaces. Inconsistent hyphenization or spacing has not been regularized. Words found only at line break were handled on a best guess basis. Anywhere and anywhere beforehand and beforehand hornworks and hornworks Christian, name and Christian name be verdued shall not be opened again this 12/month. All other occurrences of this word are at midline. The 3 preceding have a hyphen, the one following does not. Punctuation and typography. For about 5 years. For a stage or 2 together, quoth St. Thomas. Yclept logomachies rise up against him, because, continued Dr. Slop for Mrs. Shandy the mother is, tease my comfort, however, I am not an obstinate one. Therefore Gordonius, who in his cap. 15. Du amore, resumed the case at Limerick. The child looks extremely well, said my father. If the French are treacherous or up to the ears in love, I shall never, and please your honor, which Plato, I am persuaded, never I'll see the rest of these good gentry tomorrow. The abbess of Andwillets itself and sing, and say his prayers, and go to heaven greater than the pain of a wound in the knee or Greek. Omicron letter 1F50, sigma letter 1F77 alpha pi epsilon rho iota zeta letter 1F7d, mu alpha tau alpha pi epsilon rho iota, phi letter 1F7b, sigma epsilon omega, sigma footnote 5.3. Chi alpha lambda, epsilon pi letter 1F6, sigma nu letter 1F79, sigma omicron upsilon. Kappa alpha letter 1F76, delta upsilon, sigma iota, letter 1F71 tau, omicron, upsilon, letter 1F00, pi alpha lambda lambda alpha gamma, letter 1F74 new footnote, 5.6. Letter 1F41, letter 1F36 lambda omicron sigma. Tau letter 1F70, alpha letter 1F30, delta omicron letter 1FD6, alpha pi epsilon rho iota tau letter 1F73, mu nu epsilon tau alpha iota. Tau alpha letter 1F50, tau letter 1F78, pi omicron iota letter 1Fc6, sigma alpha iota kappa alpha letter 1F76, tau omicron letter 1F7a, sigma letter 1F05 mu. Alpha upsilon tau letter 1F7, sigma upsilon mu letter 1F71, chi omicron upsilon, sigma kappa alpha, tau alpha nu alpha gamma, kappa letter 1F71, sigma alpha sigma. Diacritics as printed. Letter 1F41 iota lambda omicron sigma. Tau letter 1F70, letter 1F00, iota delta omicron letter 1FD6, alpha pi epsilon rho iota tau, letter 1F73, mu nu epsilon tau alpha iota. Tau letter 1F00, upsilon tau letter 1F78, pi omicron letter 1FD6, eta sigma alpha iota kappa alpha letter 1F76, tau omicron letter 1F7a, sigma letter 1F05 mu. Alpha upsilon tau letter 1F7, sigma upsilon mu letter 1F70, chi omicron upsilon, sigma kappa alpha tau, alpha nu alpha gamma kappa letter 1 F71, sigma alpha sigma. Gamma upsilon nu alpha letter 1 FD6 kappa alpha tau epsilon. Beta omicron letter 1 FE6 nu tau. Letter 1 F00 rho omicron tau letter 1 FC6 rho alpha epsilon letter 1 F56 gamma epsilon. Letter 1 F45 tau iota. Phi iota lambda omicron sigma omicron. Phi epsilon letter 1 FD6. Sigma letter 1 F10 nu. Pi letter 1 F71 theta epsilon sigma iota.